Chapter 1: The Unforgiving Mile. The truck's engine was a low growl against a profound quiet. Jonah Hale guided the vehicle over the rutted earth, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Dust, the color of dried blood, plumed behind the tires, a momentary cloud in the immense static heat of the afternoon. The sky above was a sheet of bleached blue, empty of birds, empty of clouds, empty of any witness. For the last 50 miles, the asphalt had fractured, then crumbled, surrendering completely to this ochre desert. Now there was only the suggestion of a road, a path worn by time and indifference. He drove a heavy-duty pickup, its suspension groaning with the weight of his equipment in the bed. Each piece was nestled in custom-cut foam within hardened polymer cases. Order was a principle. Precision was a faith. His destination was a place officially erased from modern maps, Merrow's Reach, a name which tasted of grit and failure. It existed now only in archived county records and on the yellowed schematics he had studied for weeks. A gold rush town born of avarice and dead from some unrecorded catastrophe. The government contract was simple: survey the claim, document the extent of the ruins, confirm its abandonment, and sign the papers which would formally condemn the land, releasing it to the federal trust. A piece of administrative housekeeping disguised as a cartography assignment. 2 days of work, 3 at most. Jonah glanced at the advanced GPS unit mounted on his dashboard. The screen, usually a model of crisp, satellite-fed certainty, displayed his position as a blinking green dot. The dot wavered. For a moment it skipped 30 meters to the east, then corrected itself. He scowled. Solar flares, perhaps, or some atmospheric anomaly unique to this god-forsaken basin. He trusted the sun and his own compass more than any circuit board, but the technology was a required part of the process. He made a note in the digital logbook secured beside him. GPS signal unstable upon final approach. Recommend cross-referencing with manual survey. He was documenting a flaw in the system. He was in control. The terrain rose slightly. The truck crested a low ridge and he saw it. The town was a collection of broken teeth on the jawline of the horizon. Structures of weathered gray wood sagged against the skyline. A single church steeple, stripped of its cross, pointed an accusing finger at the empty sky. It was larger than the records suggested, more intact. A chill, entirely separate from the air-conditioned chill of the cab, moved over his skin. The silence seemed to emanate from the place, a low hum beneath the audible spectrum. He brought the truck to a halt 100 yards from the first dilapidated structure, a collapsed livery stable. This would be his base, close enough to work from, far enough to maintain a perimeter of sanity. He killed the engine. The subsequent quiet was a physical pressure against his eardrums. He sat for a long moment watching the town. No movement, no wind to stir the dust. The heat baked the landscape into a single, unblinking photograph. Jonah swung out of the cab, his boots crunching on the gravelly soil. The air was scorching, a furnace blast which stole the moisture from his throat. He pulled a pair of mirrored sunglasses from his shirt pocket and settled them on his face, the world dimming to a more manageable sepia tone. He walked to the truck bed, unlatching the first of the equipment cases with a satisfying metallic clack. He lifted out the laser theodolite, its black and yellow casing cool and solid in his hands. It was an instrument of absolute precision, a machine which imposed lines of irrefutable logic upon a chaotic world. He carried the tripod first, extending its carbon fiber legs and driving their spiked tips into the hard-packed earth. He leveled it with practiced efficiency, his eyes on the small bubble floating in its circle of green fluid. Perfect. He returned for the theodolite and mounted it, locking it into place. Next came the first baseline marker. It was a simple steel rod, 3 feet long and painted a brilliant orange. He took a small sledgehammer and walked a precise 50 paces towards the town's edge, his stride even, his count silent and exact. He found his spot, a patch of barren ground near the skeletal remains of a water trough. He placed the tip of the rod against the earth and began to hammer. The sound was obscenely loud in the stillness. Clang, clang, clang. Each strike was a declaration of intent. He was here, he was measuring, he was defining this space. He drove the rod 2 feet into the ground until it stood firm, a vibrant orange spike of modernity against the desolation. This was Point Alpha, the anchor for his entire survey. Satisfied, he walked the 50 paces to his theodolite. He did not run, he did not hurry. His process was a ritual and he would not deviate. He bent over the eyepiece, his hand reaching for the focus knob. He would sight Point Alpha, lock the coordinates, and begin his work. He squinted, adjusting the focus. The image sharpened. He saw the cracked earth. He saw the splintered wood of the distant water trough. He saw the heat shimmering from the ground. But the orange marker was not there. Jonah lifted his head. He stared across the 50 paces of empty ground. It was impossible. The rod had been 2 feet deep in sun-hardened soil. It could not be pulled out without significant effort, an effort which would have left obvious signs of disturbance. He walked toward the spot, his steps quicker this time. He reached the place where Point Alpha should have been. The ground was smooth, undisturbed. There was no hole, no indentation from the hammer, no scuff marks from his boots. It was as if the steel rod the hammer blows, his very presence there moments ago, had never happened. He crouched, running his fingers over the baked soil. It was warm and solid. He stood, turning a slow circle. The town watched him, silent and impassive. The church steeple seemed to have shifted a few degrees to the left. He shook his head, a sharp, angry motion, a trick of the heat, a momentary lapse of attention. There had to be a rational explanation. He had hammered the stake in the wrong place. He must have. He marched to his truck, his jaw tight, and retrieved another orange marker rod from its case. He would do it again. He would watch it this time. He would not take his eyes off it. He drove the second rod into the same spot. The hammer blows more forceful this time, ringing with a frantic energy which bordered on violence. He left the sledgehammer lying beside the stake, another anchor to reality. He backed away slowly, his gaze fixed on the bright orange spike. He walked backward the full 50 paces, never turning, his eyes straining against the glare. He reached the theodolite, his hand fumbling as he tried to find the eyepiece without breaking his stare. He bent his head, his vision filled for a split second with the blackness of the instrument's barrel. When he found the sightline again, the space was empty. The orange rod was gone. The sledgehammer was gone. The ground was flat, smooth, and utterly blank. It was as if the desert had simply swallowed them. Jonah stood frozen, his breath caught in his lungs. The sun beat down on his neck. and from the center of the silent town, a place of shadow and decay, he thought he heard a sound. It was faint, fleeting, almost lost in the ringing in his own ears. It was the sound of a single pickaxe striking stone. Chapter 2: The Silent Surveyor. Night in the desert offered no comfort. It was not a gentle descent into darkness, but a sudden, stark amputation of the light. The temperature plummeted. Jonah sat in the cab of his truck, the engine off, the doors locked. He had not started a fire. He did not want to draw attention, though from what he could not say. He had eaten a tasteless protein bar and drunk half a liter of water, the actions mechanical, a checklist for survival he performed without conscious thought. His mind was a frantic machine, trying to process the impossible events of the afternoon. The missing markers, the missing sledgehammer. He had spent an hour searching the area in an expanding grid pattern, his logical mind clinging to the idea of a thief, a prankster, a hermit hiding in the hills. He found nothing. No footprints but his own. No tire tracks but those of his truck. The ground held no secrets. It was as if his actions had been written in water. He reread the government file on his tablet, the screen's glow unnaturally bright in the profound blackness. Marrow's Reach. Founded 1878. Primary claim filed by the Golden Promise Mining Company. Population peaked at 214 souls in 1881. Last official record, a tax receipt from 1883. No census data after 1881. No record of evacuation, fire, or plague. The town simply stopped reporting. It had just ended. Jonah slept fitfully, his dreams a chaotic collage of spinning compasses and shifting horizons. He awoke before dawn, his neck stiff, the cab cold. A thin layer of frost coated the inside of the windshield. He wiped it away with his sleeve and stared at the town, a collection of darker shapes against the pre-dawn gray. Today, he would be smarter. He would not be tricked. He unloaded 4 marker posts. He carried them along with a spool of high-visibility nylon cord into the town proper. He would not rely on single points. He would create a network. He walked down what passed for a main street, his boots kicking up dust which had not been disturbed in a century. The buildings loomed over him, their windows like vacant eyes. A general store with a sagging porch. A blacksmith's shop, its great hearth cold and dark. A saloon with one of its bat-wing doors hanging from a single leather hinge. The silence was heavier here, insulated by the decaying wood. He chose the corners of a large, open intersection in the center of town. He hammered in the first stake in front of the saloon. He hammered the second in front of the general store. The third went in by the blacksmith's, the fourth by the assier's office. He worked with a grim, hurried determination. Then he unspooled the cord, tying it from one post to the next, creating a large, fluorescent orange square in the middle of the street, an inescapable geometric fact. He stood in the center of it, turning slowly, keeping all 4 posts in his sight. He began his work there, in the center of his own defined space. He took out his field tablet and started sketching the layout, comparing it to the old schematics. The discrepancies were immediate and unsettling. The original town plat showed this intersection as a perfect 90-degree cross. His own eyes told him the angle between the saloon and the general store was closer to 85 degrees. The street running past the blacksmith's was not parallel to the one by the assier's office. It diverged by at least 6 degrees. It was all wrong. The whole town was subtly warped, as if built by a carpenter with a profound defect in his vision. He noted it all, his pen scratching on the tablet's screen. Subsidence and decay cannot account for these architectural anomalies. The foundational geometry is flawed. His attention was drawn to the assayer's office. The door had fallen inward, offering a dark invitation. He needed more information, something to explain the madness which was starting to creep into his own disciplined thoughts. Leaving his equipment inside the orange square, he stepped over the threshold. The interior was a mess of rot and dust. A long counter ran the length of the room. Behind it, shelves stood empty. A heavy iron safe sat in the corner, its door thick with rust. But on the counter, miraculously preserved under a layer of fine silt, was a leather-bound ledger. Jonah approached it with a sense of reverence. He blew gently, sending a century of dust into the air, the motes dancing in the single shaft of light from a hole in the roof. He opened the book. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to a brownish ghost. Most of it was a simple log of weights and measures, ounces of dust, small nuggets, the currency of hope. Then he found it, a different hand, a different section at the back of the book. The script was frantic, spidery. Jedediah Keene, Surveyor. Beneath the name were not numbers but drawings, sketches of the town, but they were unlike any map Jonah had ever seen. Lines bent at impossible angles, streets spiraled into themselves. Buildings were represented by overlapping, contradictory shapes. In the margins, Keene had scrawled notes. The line bends when I am not looking. The angles will not hold. North is a memory. It moves, it moves. Jonah traced a finger over a drawing of the church. It was depicted with 2 steeples. Beneath it, a single, terrifying phrase. I tried to measure its heart, and it showed me its true shape. A cold dread washed over him. This was not the record of a town. It was the diary of a man losing his mind, or a man who had seen the same things Jonah was seeing. He closed the ledger, a puff of dry air sighing from its pages. He had to get out. He had to reevaluate. He turned and walked out of the assayer's office, back into the bright sun, and stopped dead. The world had tilted. The church steeple, which had been clearly visible to his left from the intersection, was now almost directly behind him. The general store was gone, replaced by a row of 3 identical, collapsed houses he had not seen before. His square of orange cord was still there, but it was no longer a square. It was a distorted trapezoid, stretched and pulled as if the very ground it was tied to had warped. 2 of the marker posts were still standing. The other 2 were gone, the cords they had anchored lying limp in the dust. His compass, which he pulled from his pocket with a trembling hand, was useless. The needle did not spin. It vibrated violently, as if caught between a dozen competing magnetic poles. His GPS, which he had left on the tripod, was a screen of pure white static. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. His training, his logic, his entire worldview fractured in that moment. This place was not just old or broken. It was wrong. It was actively, malevolently wrong. Then came the sound. It was not the distant echo of a pickaxe this time. It was close. It came from the alleyway between the saloon and the building next to it. It was a noise of profound wrongness, a dry, grinding scrape like a boulder being dragged over broken glass, a sound of immense friction. He peered into the deep shadows of the alley. For a moment he saw nothing but darkness. Then a part of the darkness detached itself. It unfolded. It was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a thing of planes and edges, a shifting geometry of what looked like dark, crystalline rock. It had a form which suggested a canine, a hound, but it was made of impossible angles which seemed to slice the air as it moved. It took a step forward, its leg, a razor-sharp triangle which refolded itself into a new position without bending. The grinding sound was the friction of its own impossible body parts moving against one another. It had no eyes, but he could sense its attention, a predatory focus which was colder than the desert night. The Angle Hound. Jonah did not scream. The sound was trapped in his throat, a knot of pure terror. He scrambled backward, his boots slipping in the loose dust. He turned and ran, his carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces behind him. Chapter 3: The Inward Pull. The heavy steel door of the truck slammed shut with a sound like a guillotine. Jonah fumbled with the lock, his fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. He pressed his back against the seat, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He stared through the windshield at the silent, sun-drenched street. The alleyway was empty. The thing, the Angle Hound, was gone, but its image was burned onto his retinas, a nightmare of living geometry, an insult to the very laws of physics. He stayed in the truck for hours. The sun arced across the sky, beating down on the metal roof, turning the cab into a suffocating oven. He did not care. The heat was a real, understandable misery. It was nothing compared to the cold, alien wrongness of that town. He tried to rationalize what he had seen, a hallucination brought on by heat stroke and dehydration. The words were hollow, a flimsy shield of logic against an undeniable memory. He had seen it. He had heard it. When dusk began to bleed across the sky, he knew he could not stay. His supplies were finite. The contract was irrelevant now. Survival was the only objective. He would leave. He would drive east and not stop until he hit civilization. He would tell them the claim was unstable, geologically unsound. He would omit the part about the town being a conscious, shifting entity hunted by a creature made of paradoxes. They would certify him insane. He put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a reassuring roar, a sound of the sane world. He switched on the headlights, their powerful beams cutting two perfect cones through the gathering dark. He put the truck in gear and turned the wheel, pulling a wide arc to face the direction he had come from, away from Merrow's reach. He drove, his eyes fixed on the path illuminated by his headlights. The desert scrub flowed past his windows. He kept a steady pace, expecting at any moment to see the familiar rise of the ridge he had crossed to get here. He drove for 10 minutes, 20. The landscape remained stubbornly flat, an endless expanse of gravel and pale, skeletal bushes. He should have been miles away by now. He checked the truck's trip meter, 14.7 miles. Impossible. He had not been driving that fast. He slowed, a new kind of fear coiling in his stomach. The ground ahead seemed to slope downward, which was wrong. He should have been climbing. He continued, more slowly now, his knuckles white on the wheel. The road led him around a tall rock formation which he did not recognize. As he cleared it, his headlights fell upon a familiar shape. A church steeple, pointing a silent wooden finger at the stars. He was back. He had not driven in a circle, he was certain of it. His path had been straight. Yet here he was at the edge of Marrow's Reach, entering from a completely different direction. The truck idled, its engine a lonely sound in the immense quiet. The town seemed to be waiting for him. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. He was a child, maybe 7 years old, in a school classroom. The teacher had asked him a question, a simple arithmetic problem he should have known. He had frozen, his mind a total blank. The faces of his classmates turned toward him. The weight of their expectant silence was crushing. He remembered the hot shame which had flooded his cheeks. He shook his head violently. Where had that come from? He had not thought of that moment in 30 years. He put the truck in reverse, his foot pressing hard on the accelerator. The tires spun, kicking up rocks. He would not enter the town. He reversed for a solid minute, then spun the wheel and drove away again in a new direction. The result was the same. After a period of driving over unfamiliar terrain, he found himself once more approaching the dilapidated buildings of Marrow's Reach. This time he was facing the old general store, and with the sight of it came another unwanted piece of his past. A memory of his father, a stern, quiet man, looking at Jonah's poor report card, not with anger but with a deep, weary disappointment which was infinitely worse. Jonah had promised to do better, a promise he had not kept. The town was doing this. It was not just a physical trap, it was a psychological one. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. He got out, leaving the engine running, the headlights carving a path into the dust. He would walk. A man could not be fooled as easily as a machine. He would use the stars, Polaris, the one constant. He located it, a faint but steady pinpoint in the northern sky. He would walk south until he collapsed or was free. He walked. He did not look at the town. He kept his eyes on the southern horizon, a line of dark hills. He walked over the uneven ground, his boots stumbling on loose rocks. His shadow, cast long and thin by his truck's headlights behind him, stretched out before him. He walked with a grim rhythm, counting his paces. 100, 200. The air grew colder. The silence deepened. After what seemed like an hour, he stopped, breathing heavily. He had kept a straight line. He had not deviated. He turned, expecting to see the lights of his truck as small, distant stars. They were directly behind him, no more than 50 yards away. And he was standing in the very center of the town, in the warped, trapezoidal space where his orange cord still lay in the dust. He had walked for an hour and had arrived at the very heart of the maze. The phenomenon was undeniable now. The town was not merely shifting. It possessed a gradient, a subtle, imperceptible slope which pulled everything, trucks, men, even light itself, towards its center. The inward pull. It was a gravitational field of malice. His own past failures were not random memories. They were bait. The town was using his regrets to draw him into places which resonated with them, pulling him deeper into its core, both physically and emotionally. Despair was a physical weight. He sank to his knees in the dusty street. He was a specimen in a jar, a rat in a maze designed by a mad god. There was no escape. The town would not let him leave. It would pull him apart piece by piece, memory by memory. He lifted his head. He needed shelter, a place to think. a place to hide from the thing made of angles which he knew was hunting in the rearranged shadows. The only structure which seemed to possess any sense of solidity, of permanence, was the church. Its steeple had been his one recurring landmark. With a groan, he pushed himself to his feet and began the slow walk towards it. The church doors were massive, made of thick, sun-bleached planks of wood. He put his shoulder to one and pushed. It opened with a protracted screech of rusty hinges. The air inside was cold, stale, and smelled of dry rot and ozone. The interior was a cavern of darkness, broken only by the faint starlight filtering through the tall, grime-coated windows. Pews stood in neat rows, coated in a uniform layer of dust. At the far end, an altar stood bare, and in front of the altar was a figure. It was not a ghost, it was not a memory, it was a person, their form solid and real in the gloom. A woman, her back to him, with a fall of bone-white hair which reached her waist. She stood perfectly still. Jonah froze in the doorway, his hand on the rough wood of the door. He was not alone. The woman turned, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were moving through water. Her face was a mask of deep wrinkles, her eyes dark pits in the low light. She looked ancient, a part of the desert itself. It was Cassidy Finch, a name he recognized from a footnote in the county records, the last known landowner of the ridge overlooking the claim, a recluse. Her gaze fell upon him, and there was no surprise in it, only a weary sort of recognition. Her voice, when it came, was a dry rasp, the sound of sand scouring stone. "You're making it angry," she said. Her words echoed slightly in the vast, empty space. "Jedediah hates being measured. The more you try to draw a line around him, the more he changes to prove you wrong." Chapter 4: The Geometry of Fear. Jonah's muscles locked. He remained in the church doorway, a silhouette against the starlit desert, his mind struggling to process the woman's words. Her presence was more jarring than the Angle hound. She was a human element in a place which had systematically stripped him of his humanity. The name she spoke, Jedediah, echoed the frantic script from the Assyr's ledger. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was a diagnosis. "Who is Jedediah?" he asked. His voice was raw, a stranger's voice. Cassidy Finch took a slow step towards him, her bare feet making no sound on the dusty floorboards. She was not a threat. She was something far more unnerving, a part of the local ecology, as much a fixture of this place as the warped buildings and the thirsting stones. "He was the first one," she said, her voice low. "The one who drew the first map. He thought he could put a frame around this place, put it on paper and own it." She gestured with a gnarled hand to the empty space around them. "But this land doesn't want to be owned. It doesn't want to be known. Jedediah didn't find gold. He found a place where the world isn't finished, where the rules are still soft. It broke his mind. And when he broke, he became the new rule." Jonah pushed the door shut behind him, the screech of the hinges loud in the ensuing silence. He needed answers more than he needed an escape route he no longer believed in. "You're saying the town is him, a person." "Not a person. Never again. He is the map now, the one he tried to draw. The shifting streets are his frustration. The dead ends are his despair. You brought your tools, your lines, your numbers. You are trying to do what he did." Her dark eyes seemed to absorb the faint light. And he is showing you what he learned, that any line you draw here is a lie. He walked slowly down the central aisle, the dust crunching under his boots, a desecration of the ancient quiet. He stopped a few pews away from her. The thing in the alley, what was that? One of his tantrums, Cassidy said, her tone matter of fact. When he gets angry enough, he makes things, sharp things, to cut the lines he can't erase. He made the hound from the memory of a dog the miners shot for sport. He is very good at remembering ugly things. The casual explanation was more chilling than any scream. Jonah ran a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. He felt a sliver of his old self, the logical surveyor trying to reassert control, to categorize, to understand the mechanics of the nightmare. You live here. It was a statement, not a question. I live near, she corrected, on the ridge. The town and I have an understanding. I do not try to measure it. It does not try to claim me. I am a witness, not a trespasser. She looked at him, her head tilted. You are a trespasser. You woke him from his restless sleep. How do I get out? Jonah's voice was stripped of everything but desperation. You can't go out the way you came in. The road remembers your truck. It will loop you back forever. Jedediah is proud of that little trick, she said. There is only one other way, the way he came in. The mine. Jonah thought of the black, gaping maw he had seen on the old maps, a place marked simply as the Promised Shaft. And what's in the mine? The heart of the problem, Cassidy said. The place where he broke. A place where down is not a direction but a destination. You would not survive it, not now. You are too loud, too full of straight lines and right angles. A sound from outside cut through their conversation, a low, grinding scrape. It was distant but unmistakable. The angle hound was moving, hunting. Cassidy's head snapped towards the sound, her posture suddenly rigid. It is looking for you, she whispered. Your machines, your truck, they are like beacons to it, all that order, it offends the landscape. Jonah's blood ran cold. His truck was his only source of water, his only shelter from the freezing night. It was an extension of himself, his one piece of the sane world. What will it do? Unmake it, she said simply. It will smooth it out, fold it up, erase the insult. Without another thought, Jonah turned and ran from the church, yanking the great door open. He sprinted into the starlight, his mind consumed with a single, primal need, to protect his truck. He ran down the misshapen street, his boots kicking up clouds of ancient dust. The town seemed to watch him, the windows of the silent buildings like 100 pairs of vacant eyes. He saw the truck, its headlights still cutting a path into the darkness, and he saw the creature. It was between him and the vehicle. It stood in the center of the road, a shifting knot of impossible geometry. It was larger than he remembered, a dozen feet of interlocking, razor-sharp planes of obsidian-like material, constantly refolding and rearranging itself. Its form was an assault on the senses. The mind could not hold its shape for more than a second before it changed into something new and equally wrong. The scraping sound was louder now, the sound of its very existence grinding against the fabric of reality. It was not looking at him. It was focused entirely on the truck. It took a step, a motion which was less a step and more a terrifying disassembly and reassembly of its form a few feet closer. It was ignoring him, dismissing him as an irrelevance. The true enemy was the machine, the product of an ordered universe. Jonah skidded to a stop, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was weaponless, helpless. He could only watch as the creature approached his truck, a predator stalking its inanimate prey. The angle hound reached the front of the vehicle. It did not attack with tooth or claw. It lowered what passed for its head and pressed one of its sharp, flat planes against the truck's metal grille. The grinding intensified. The truck's powerful headlights began to flicker. Jonah watched, horrified, as the solid steel of the grille seemed to simplify. The lines softened. The defined shape of the radiator vents blurred as if a sculptor were smoothing clay. The metal did not dent or tear. It was being unmade, its complex, manufactured form surrendering to a more primitive, shapeless state. The creature moved along the side of the truck. It pressed a flat, triangular facet against the driver's side door. The window, a sheet of hardened safety glass, did not shatter. It turned cloudy, then opaque, losing its transparency, its very nature as glass. The sharp, clean lines of the door panel sagged, the metal losing its rigid form and flowing like thick wax. The side mirror drooped, then folded in on itself, becoming a meaningless lump of plastic and chrome. Jonah felt a violation deeper than any physical attack. It was an annihilation of logic. He was witnessing his world, his tools, his certainty being systematically erased. He had to do something, anything. He looked around frantically. The ground was littered with rocks and debris. He snatched up a heavy stone, its weight unfamiliar in his hand. He was not a man of violence. He was a man of measurement, but there was nothing left to measure. He yelled, a hoarse, wordless roar of defiance. He threw the rock with all his strength. It flew through the air and struck the angle hound square in its shifting flank. The rock did not bounce off. It simply vanished. It touched the creature's surface and was absorbed, gone from the world. But he had gotten its attention. The creature stopped its work on the truck. The constant, grinding rearrangement of its body ceased for a single, terrifying second. It became still. And then, slowly, its entire form rotated to face him. He felt its focus lock onto him, a cold, calculating pressure which was far worse than mindless aggression. He had proven himself to be a part of the problem, an agent of order, an anomaly to be smoothed. The angle hound took a step towards him, its form unfolding, its impossible angles catching the starlight like 1,000 slivers of black ice. And it began to move faster. Chapter 5: A Map of Scars. Jonah didn't wait to see more. He spun on his heel and ran. The church was his only hope, the only sanctuary he knew. His feet pounded the ground, his breath burning in his throat. He did not dare look back, but the sound was behind him, a rhythmic, grating scrape which was gaining on him. The sound of a razor being dragged across stone. He reached the church and threw himself inside, slamming the heavy wooden door shut. He fumbled for a bar, a lock, anything to secure it, but there was nothing. The door was held only by its own immense weight and a simple iron latch. He leaned against it, his body trembling, his ears straining against the wood. The scraping stopped directly outside. A heavy silence descended, thick with predatory intent. He held his breath. A sharp, piercing sound cut through the wood as if a giant needle were being pushed through the planks. A single, clean hole appeared at eye level, splintering the ancient wood. Then another, and another. The angle hound was not trying to break the door down. It was perforating it, unmaking it molecule by molecule. "It will not hold." Cassidy's voice was calm, a whisper from the shadows near the altar. "You cannot hide from the shape of this place. You can only learn to walk its crooked lines." Jonah pushed himself away from the disintegrating door. He backed down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the growing pattern of holes. "What do I do?" "You have two choices," she said, stepping into a pale shaft of starlight from a high window. "Stay here and be unmade, or you go down, into the promised shaft, into Jedediah's heart." She pointed a thin finger towards a section of the floor to the left of the altar. A large, square outline was visible in the floorboards, a trapdoor he hadn't noticed before. The church was built on top of it. The first miners thought they could bless the ground. They were wrong. The door behind him gave a final, groaning shudder and then collapsed inward, not in pieces, but as a pile of coarse, gray sawdust. The angle hound stood in the doorway, its form filling the entire arch. It was a living sculpture of geometric dread. Jonah made his choice. He ran towards the altar, towards Cassidy. The creature flowed into the church, its movement unnervingly silent now that it was off the gravel. "The way is dark," Cassidy said as he reached her side, "and it does not like the light." She was holding something he hadn't seen before, a modern, battery-powered lantern. Its beam was weak, its plastic casing yellowed with age. Jedediah hated the sun. He hated the open sky. In the deep places his memory is strongest. Your light will be an anchor, but it will also make you a target for what else lives in his darkness. She knelt, her old joints protesting with a faint crackle, and slid her fingers into a gap in the trapdoor. She heaved. The heavy door lifted, revealing a square of perfect, impenetrable blackness. A cold, damp air, smelling of wet rock and something metallic, like old blood, rose from the hole. "Go," she said, pushing the lantern into his hands. "Follow the tunnels. Jedediah's madness has a grammar. You will see his marks, his drawings, the ones you saw in the book. They are not warnings, they are instructions. He was not just losing his mind, he was mapping it. He was showing himself the way out." Jonah hesitated, staring down into the abyss. The angle hound was moving down the aisle, its form seeming to warp the very space around it, the pews nearest to it appearing to bend and twist. "Come with me." Cassidy shook her head, a sad, slow motion. "My place is here. I am the witness. This is your path, mapmaker. You must walk it alone. Now go, and try not to think in straight lines." He took the lantern. He swung his legs over the edge and found the top rung of a rotting wooden ladder. He looked back at the old woman. She stood calm and erect, facing the approaching creature, a frail figure against an unstoppable force. The angle hound paused, its attention momentarily divided between Jonah's descending light and the still figure of the woman. "What will happen to you?" he asked, his voice tight. "We will have a conversation," she said, her eyes never leaving the creature. "We have had it many times before." Jonah didn't wait for another word. He began his descent, the lantern's beam cutting a small, shaky circle into the oppressive dark. The wooden rungs of the ladder were slick with moisture and felt fragile under his weight. He descended past earth, past rock, into the cold, silent depths of the earth. The sounds from the church above faded, replaced by the dripping of water and the frantic pounding of his own heart. After what felt like 100 feet, his boots touched solid ground. He was in a roughly hewn tunnel just tall enough for him to stand upright. The air was thick, heavy, and difficult to draw into his lungs. He swept the lantern beam around. The tunnel walls were dark, wet rock, but they were covered in scratches, scrawls, the frantic, spidery markings from the surveyor's ledger. They were everywhere. Angles, spirals, impossible shapes which made his head ache to look at them. He was inside the map. He chose a direction and began to walk. The tunnel was not straight. It curved and bent at unnatural angles, a mockery of proper engineering. He ran his hand along the wall, his fingers tracing the mad graffiti. He felt a faint vibration in the stone, a low, subsonic hum which seemed to resonate in his bones. It was the entire town, the entire landscape, breathing around him. He came to a junction where the tunnel split into three. On the wall, carved with what must have been a knife point, was one of the symbols from the ledger, a circle eating its own tail but with a straight line cutting through its center. A choice. He remembered Cassidy's words. They are instructions. What did it mean? Did the straight line mean danger, or was it the path of the rational man, a trap for someone like him? He shone the light down each tunnel. The one on the left sloped steeply downwards. The one on the right was narrow and constricted. The one in the center looked straight, level, and safe. Too safe. It was the kind of path he would have chosen without a second thought only 2 days ago. It was a path a surveyor would take. He remembered the warped buildings, the bent roads, the lies the landscape told. He had to unlearn a lifetime of logic. He chose the left tunnel, the one which plunged deeper into the earth. He began the descent, his boots slipping on the wet, sloping rock. He traveled for what could have been minutes or hours. Time had no meaning in this constant, pressing dark. The only sound was the drip of water and the scuff of his own feet. The markings on the walls became more complex, more agitated. He saw crude drawings of men with picks and shovels, their faces contorted in silent screams. He saw shapes which hinted at the angle hound, and other things, things with too many limbs, things which seemed to be made of shadow and teeth. He came to a small cavern, a bubble in the rock. In the center of it was a rusted mine cart, filled to the brim with worthless rock. And sitting on a pile of rubble in the corner was a skeleton. It was clad in the tattered remains of a miner's clothes. In one of its bony hands, it clutched a single, large nugget of glittering gold. Jonah approached cautiously, his lantern beam dancing over the scene. He saw something carved into the rock face just behind the skeleton. It was a detailed drawing of this very cavern. It showed the mine cart. It showed the skeleton. But in the drawing, the skeleton wasn't holding a nugget of gold. It was holding a human heart. And from the heart, black, thorny vines grew, wrapping around the skeleton's arm and burrowing into the rock of the cavern wall. He looked from the drawing to the skeleton. The nugget of fool's gold seemed to gleam with a malevolent light of its own. He backed away slowly, a deep, instinctual revulsion rising in him. He was walking through a gallery of someone's worst memories, etched into the stone itself. As he backed out of the cavern, his lantern beam caught something new on the wall of the tunnel ahead, a fresh mark. It was not old and faded like the others. It was a simple arrow scratched into the rock with a sharp stone. It was clean, precise, a surveyor's mark, his mark. But he had not made it. The arrow pointed deeper into the tunnel, waiting for him. Chapter 6. The Sound of Erasing. A frigid stillness settled over Jonah. The arrow was an impossibility which was somehow more intimate and terrifying than the hound. The creature was a monster. This was a violation. It was a perfect imitation of his own work, a field mark he had drawn 1,000 times on 1,000 different surveys. Precise, economical, unmistakably his. He swept the lantern beam back and forth between the fresh arrow and the ancient, frantic scrawls of Jedediah Keene. They were two different languages. One was the language of chaos and despair. The other was the language of logic and control. His language, and it was being used against him. Was this another trick, a psychic projection, or was someone or something else down here with him, someone who knew him? He forced himself to move, his boots heavy as lead. He followed the arrow. It felt like a surrender, an admission that he was no longer in control of his own symbols, his own trade. The tunnel twisted, descended, and opened into a vast chamber. It was immense, far larger than any hand-dug cavern should be. The ceiling was lost in the darkness above the reach of his lantern, and the air was alive with the sound of dripping water, 1,000 tiny echoes creating a constant, whispering patter. The floor of the chamber was a forest of rock pillars, stretching from floor to ceiling like the petrified trunks of ancient trees. The ground was uneven, littered with loose rock and deep, dark pools of standing water, and on the far side of the chamber he saw it. Another arrow, freshly scratched into one of the pillars, gleaming wetly in the lantern light. It pointed to the right, into a dense cluster of the rock formations. He started to cross the chamber, picking his way carefully between the pillars. The space felt wrong, too large, too symmetrical. It felt less like a natural cavern and more like a designed space, an architecture of madness. He kept the lantern beam low, scanning the ground ahead for pitfalls. That's when he heard the new sound. It was not the dripping of water or the grinding of the hound. It was a soft, rhythmic scraping. A shhhh, shhhh, shhhh sound, like a wire brush on stone or a broom sweeping away dust. It came from somewhere in the darkness ahead. He froze, dousing his light, plunging himself into absolute blackness. The sound continued, steady, methodical. It was the sound of something being cleaned, wiped away. He stood motionless for a long minute, his ears straining. The sound was not moving. It was stationary, somewhere deep within the forest of pillars. He needed to see. He crouched behind a thick pillar, took a deep breath, and flicked the lantern on for a brief, controlled second, sweeping the beam in the direction of the sound. The image his brain captured in that flash of light was surreal and horrifying. Between two pillars, perhaps 40 yards away, was a creature. It was shaped vaguely like a man, tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its joints in the wrong places. But it wasn't made of flesh. It appeared to be composed of the same dark, chalky substance as the tunnel walls. It was a being of living rock. Its head was a smooth, featureless ovoid. It had no eyes, no mouth. In its long, multi-jointed arms, it held a tool. It looked like a wide, flat rake, but instead of tines, it had a solid, sharp edge. The creature was using this tool to scrape at the walls of the cavern, but it wasn't carving. It was erasing. Jonah watched, mesmerized by the horror of it. On the wall the creature was working on, Jonah could see the frantic, ancient scrawls of Jedediah Keen. The creature would drag its tool over the markings, and with each pass the scratches would vanish. The wall would be left smooth, blank, and sterile. This thing, this unminer, wasn't digging. It was unwriting the story of the mine. It was erasing Jedediah's map. The implications were staggering. If Jedediah's mad cartography was the only way out, this thing was methodically destroying his only chance of escape. The creature stopped its work, its blank, ovoid head tilted as if listening. It had heard him, or it had seen the flicker of his light. It turned its whole body, a slow, creaking rotation of stone on stone. It looked in his direction. Jonah's heart hammered against his ribs. He was hidden, but he felt utterly exposed, as if the thing could see his heat, his fear, his very presence in the dark. He had to move. He could not stay here. He remembered the arrow pointing to the right. It was a path, but who had made it? Jedediah, or the thing which was hunting him? Was it a guide or a lure? The unminer took a step. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. Its feet did not lift. They seemed to dissolve and reform a pace forward, the ground momentarily turning soft and malleable where it stepped. It was coming towards him. Jonah scrambled away, keeping the pillars between himself and the creature. He moved to the right, following the direction the arrow had indicated. He risked another quick flash of the lantern. Ahead of him, the path between the pillars narrowed into a tight corridor. On the wall at its entrance was another of his arrows. He had no other choice. He ran for the corridor, the sound of the unminer's slow, deliberate pursuit behind him. The scraping had stopped. It was replaced by a soft, squelching sound as it moved across the damp cavern floor. He squeezed into the narrow passage. The rock walls pressed in on him, so close he had to turn sideways to get through. The air grew thick, stagnant. He could hear the creature entering the forest of pillars behind him, its presence a palpable wave of cold dread. The passage opened into another tunnel, this one small and circular, like a massive burrow. The walls here were different. They were covered in a thick layer of a strange, gray, fibrous substance. A memory moss, he thought, recalling the term from some half-forgotten geology text. A subterranean lichen. He kept his light on now, the fear of the unknown ahead less than the fear of the thing behind. He hurried down the tunnel, and as he ran, his bare hand brushed against the wall. His mind exploded. It was not a thought or a memory. It was a direct, unfiltered feed of raw sensation. He felt immense, crushing pressure, the taste of rock dust and terror, the agony of lungs collapsing, the final, desperate thought of a man named Thomas trapped in a cave-in 1882. Marry the light. The sensation vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Jonah gasping, leaning against the opposite wall, his mind reeling. The moss was a psychic recording medium. It had absorbed the final moments of the dead. This entire tunnel was a tomb, lined with the echoes of agony. He looked at the walls with new horror. Every fiber, every patch of gray was a soul's last scream. He pushed himself forward, careful not to touch the walls again. He had to get through. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a brighter space. He saw light, not the weak beam of his lantern, but a soft, flickering glow. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged in his chest. He stumbled out of the tunnel and into a small, cave-like room. The light was coming from a dozen or so candles, set in niches in the rock, and sitting on a crate in the center of the room was a child. A little girl, no older than 10, with wide, luminous eyes which seemed to glow with a light of their own. She was humming a soft, tuneless melody. It was candle-eyed Lottie. She looked up as he entered, and a slow smile spread across her face. "You found me," she said, her voice a clear, high-pitched whisper which did not echo. "Do you want to play a game? It's called hide and seek. I'll count. You hide." Before Jonah could answer, she put her small hands over her glowing eyes. The soft light of the room was instantly extinguished, plunging him back into total darkness. 1, she began to count. And with her first number, Jonah felt the floor beneath his feet shift and groan, the very geography of the room rearranging itself around him in the suffocating dark. Chapter 7: The Rules of the Game. The darkness was absolute. The soft glow of Lottie's eyes had been the only source of light, and with it gone, the blackness became a physical substance, pressing in, smothering. Jonah scrabbled backward, his hands slapping against damp stone where the tunnel opening had been moments before. It was gone. The wall was solid, seamless. The sound of shifting rock was all around him, a low, grinding groan like the world's slowest earthquake. It was the sound of Jedediah's labyrinth reconfiguring itself. 2. Lottie's voice was a clear, innocent chime in the chaos, impossibly close. Panic was a hot spike in his throat. He had to move. He couldn't stay where he was, a stationary target in a moving maze. He pushed himself along the wall, his hands sweeping frantically through the dark, mapping the space by touch. The floor was uneven, tilting at a shallow, nauseating angle. This room was no longer the small, stable cavern he had entered. It was changing. 3. His hand found an opening, a low archway barely 4 feet high. He didn't hesitate. He dropped to his hands and knees and scrambled through it, the rough stone scraping his back. He emerged into another space, the air colder here, the sound of dripping water louder. He rose to his feet, his arms outstretched, a blind man in a world without walls. 4. Her voice echoed now, seeming to come from the archway he had just crawled through, and from somewhere high above him at the same time. He needed light. He fumbled for the lantern he had dropped, his fingers closing around its cool plastic casing. He flicked the switch. The beam cut a shaky circle into the oppressive dark, revealing he was in a narrow chasm. The walls were sheer, slick with moisture, rising into darkness beyond the reach of his light. Ahead, the chasm narrowed to a dead end. Behind him was the low arch. It was a trap. He had hidden himself in a cage. 5. He spun around, aiming the light back at the archway. It was no longer an arch. The stone had flowed and sealed, leaving another blank, solid wall. He was boxed in. He swept the beam upwards, frantically searching for a handhold, an escape route, but the walls were smooth and wet. 6. The childish count was a relentless torment. The ground beneath his feet vibrated. A low rumbling started, growing in intensity. He looked down. A crack appeared in the stone floor, racing from one wall to the other like a bolt of black lightning. The section of floor he was standing on gave a violent lurch and began to tilt, descending like a slow, primitive elevator. He was being lowered deeper into the earth. 7. He braced himself against the tilting floor, his knuckles white on the lantern. The chasm walls slid past him. The air grew colder, heavier. The rumbling stopped. He was in a new space. The section of floor he was on settled into place with a heavy, final thud. He stood in a vast, circular chamber. The walls were lined with row upon row of mining lockers, thousands of them, their rusted doors hanging open like silent, screaming mouths. A mausoleum of forgotten labor. 8. Her voice was everywhere now. A whisper from the dark maw of a locker to his left. A giggle from the darkness overhead. She was the ghost in this machine. He had to find a way out before she reached 10. He ran, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He followed the curving wall of lockers, his lantern beam bobbing wildly, searching for a door, a tunnel, any kind of exit. Every locker he passed was empty, filled with nothing but shadow and the faint smell of rust and despair. At 9, he saw it. A single locker halfway down the row was closed. Its door was new, the metal clean, almost polished. It had a modern, numbered keypad lock on it. It didn't belong. It was another intrusion, another piece of the world's wreckage pulled into Jedediah's madness. He ran to it. There was no handle, only the keypad. He needed a code. He thought of the arrows, the symbols, the mad logic of the place. There was no logic here, not his kind. He heard a soft, scraping sound behind him. He didn't need to look. He knew what it was. The game was almost over. He pounded his fist against the locker door in frustration. He was out of time. He was trapped. He leaned his head against the cold metal, his breath fogging its clean surface. He was going to die here in the dark as part of a dead child's game. A memory, sharp and unwanted, surfaced, the inward compass pulling at him. He was back in his cramped college dorm room, a final exam he had failed, Engineering Physics 201. He had stared at the final question, a complex problem of structural mechanics, his mind a total blank. The shame of that failure had haunted him for years, a symbol of his own intellectual limits. What was the number of that course? 201. It was a desperate, insane guess, a leap of faith into the mad grammar of the town. His fingers, trembling, punched the numbers into the keypad. 1. A soft click echoed in the chamber. The locker door swung inward. Inside was not a space for storage. It was a tunnel, black and narrow, an escape. 10, Lottie whispered, her voice directly behind him. Ready or not, here I come. He didn't look back. He threw himself into the opening, the metal edge of the doorway catching his side. He crawled into the darkness on his hands and knees, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. He heard a soft, disappointed sigh from the other side, and then only the sound of his own frantic breathing. The tunnel was metal, a cylindrical ventilation shaft, cold and tight. He crawled for what felt like an eternity, the lantern held in his teeth, its beam a wobbly guide. The shaft began to slope upwards. He could feel a faint draft of air on his face, air that was less stale, less heavy. He was moving towards the surface. The shaft ended in a heavy iron grill. He pushed against it. It was stiff with rust, but it moved. He shoved it open and pulled himself out, tumbling onto a floor of warped wooden planks. He was in a building. He scrambled to his feet and looked around. He was in a small, cramped room. A collapsed bed frame stood in one corner, a broken wash basin in another. Through a grimy window, he could see the pale, gray light of dawn. He was back on the surface, back in Marrow's reach. He looked out the window. The town was different again. The church was gone. The general store was now on the opposite side of the street. The landscape had been reshuffled while he was below. He had escaped the mine, but he had not escaped the maze. He felt a profound exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. He had survived the night. He had played the game and won for now. But he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core that the sun would not save him. Daylight did not bring safety here. It only changed the nature of the threat. The town was not a creature of the night. It was simply awake. And now it knew he understood some of its rules. He stumbled out of the small building, a miner's shack, and into the main street. The air was cold and still. The morning light cast long, distorted shadows from the rearranged buildings. He had to find Cassidy. She was the only one who understood this place. But in this new version of the town, he had no idea where to even begin looking for her. He stood in the middle of the street, a lone figure in a world that was actively hostile to his existence. He felt a new sensation. Not fear, not despair, but a cold, burning anger. This place, this Jedediah, had taken everything from him. His tools, his truck, his belief in a rational world. It had tried to unmake him, to break him. He looked at the warped, impossible geometry of the town around him. He was a cartographer, a map maker. This place was the ultimate puzzle, a landscape which defied mapping. But what if he stopped trying to map it as it was? What if, instead, he tried to map it as it thought? He pulled the Assier's ledger, which he had stuffed into the cargo pocket of his pants, from his pocket. He opened it to the back, to Jedediah Keene's frantic sketches. They were not just a map of madness. Cassidy had said they were instructions, a grammar. He would learn that grammar. He would learn to read this place not with his eyes, but with its own twisted logic. He would not just survive it. He would solve it. He found a clear patch of dust on the ground, and using a sharp stone, he began to draw. He didn't draw the town as he saw it. He drew the symbol Lottie had shown him in his mind, the circle, the line, the arrow. He drew the symbol of the heart and the thorns. He began to build his own map, not of the place, but of its rules. As he worked, a shadow fell over him. He looked up, his hand freezing over the dust. A man stood before him. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in the faded, threadbare clothes of a 19th-century preacher. His face was a mask of zealous intensity, his eyes burning with a cold fire. It was Preacher Jacob, the ghost from Jedediah's memory. The preacher did not speak. He simply raised a hand and pointed, not at Jonah, but at the ruins of a building down the street. The town's bank. Its stone facade was blackened with soot, as if from a fire long ago. "The root of all evil," the preacher whispered, his voice the dry rustle of dead leaves. He kept his gold there, but he also kept his greatest sin. You seek a way out, but every path from this place is paved with confession. Chapter 8: The Currency of Sin. Jonah remained on his knees, the sharp stone clutched in his hand. The spectral form of preacher Jacob was unnervingly solid, more present than the fleeting image of Lottie had been. He did not feel like a memory. He felt like a fixture, a permanent monument to the town's rotten piety. His pointing finger was an accusation. Jonah rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the blackened bank. Another piece of the puzzle, another station in this twisted pilgrimage. He looked from the preacher to the bank, then back. What sin? The preacher's lips curled into a semblance of a smile, a grim, joyless expression. Jedediah did not murder his partner for gold, he rasped, his voice seeming to stir the dust at Jonah's feet. He did it for a map, a different map, one that showed not a treasure of the earth but a treasure of the spirit, a path to absolution he believed was hidden beneath this town. He spilled blood to own the way to wash his hands clean. The ghost lowered his arm. The way out is not a line on a page, it is an act of penance. The town demands a price, a confession for a confession. Go to the vault. See the sin he built this maze to hide. Then perhaps the path will show itself to you. With that, the preacher's form wavered, becoming transparent, and dissolved into a swirl of dust motes which the morning breeze carried away. He was gone. Jonah was alone again in the distorted street. The bank stood as a silent, brooding challenge. He knew he had no choice. Every trial he survived seemed to lead only to another, each one digging deeper into the history of the place and deeper into his own psyche. He walked towards the bank, the ledger clutched in his hand like a holy text. The entrance to the bank was a gaping hole. The heavy oak doors had been burned away, leaving only twisted black hinges bolted to the stone. Inside, the scene was one of utter devastation. The fire had been intense. The wooden counters were charcoal, the floorboards blackened bones. But the vault, a massive iron box at the back of the room, was untouched. Its circular door, thick and studded with rivets, stood slightly ajar. A new fear, different from the terror of the hound or the mind-bending games of Lottie, crept over him. This was a more human dread, the fear of discovering a secret so ugly it had spawned all of this madness. He pushed on the heavy vault door. It swung inward with a deep, resonant groan. The air that flowed out was stale, cold, and carried a strange, metallic scent, like the smell of an old coin held too long in a sweaty palm. He shone his lantern inside. The vault was small, no more than 10 feet square. Its walls were lined with empty safety deposit boxes, their little doors hanging open. In the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, sat a single object, a large, ornate wooden box, inlaid with tarnished silver. It was a lockbox, but of a size and craftsmanship far beyond what a frontier town should possess. Jonah stepped inside, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He approached the box. The air grew colder, heavier. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the lid. It was not locked. He lifted it. The contents were not gold or papers or any kind of treasure. The box was filled with dozens of small, hand-carved objects. They were human figures, each no more than a few inches tall, carved with exquisite, disturbing detail from a pale, soft wood. They depicted men, women, and children, the miners, the townsfolk of Marrow's Reach. Each one was a perfect, miniature portrait. But there was something wrong with them. Each figure had a single, tiny, dark red stain on it, a spot on the chest, a drop on the forehead, a smear across a hand. It was dried blood. He picked one up. It was a woman with her hair in a bun, her face etched with worry. He recognized her from a faded photograph he had seen in the county records, the blacksmith's wife. As his fingers closed around the small wooden effigy, a wave of sickness and vertigo washed over him. He felt a phantom pain in his own chest, a sharp, piercing agony. He heard a woman's terrified scream, not with his ears, but inside his own mind. He dropped the figure as if it were burning hot. It clattered against the other carvings in the box. He understood. This was the sin. This was not just a representation of the townsfolk. Jedediah or someone had used these effigies for some terrible ritual. This was sympathetic magic, voodoo, a curse. The blood was real. He rummaged through the box, his initial fear replaced by a horrified, morbid curiosity. He found a carving of the preacher, a tiny drop of blood on his carved wooden Bible. He found a carving of Lottie, a smear of red across her eyes. He found them all. The entire population of Marrow's Reach, captured in wood and blood in this box. At the very bottom, beneath all the others, were two more figures. They were larger, more detailed. One was a man with a wild beard and desperate eyes, a surveyor's transit clutched in his hand. Jedediah Keene. His figure was unstained. The other was a man with a kinder, broader face. His effigy was split in two, a jagged crack running down its center, and it was saturated with blood. This was his partner, the first victim. This was the source. The town wasn't just a psychic echo of Jedediah's madness. It was an active, ongoing curse anchored to these figures. The souls of the townsfolk weren't just haunting this place. They were trapped. Their pain, their fear, their violent ends were the very mortar holding the shifting walls of the labyrinth together. A sound from behind him made him spin around. A low, guttural chuckle. Leaning against the doorframe of the vault was a new figure. This one was no ghost. He was corporeal, solid, but his eyes held a spectral light. He was a portly man with a florid face and a three-fingered hand, dressed in the gaudy vest of a riverboat gambler. Three-fingered Abel. "You found the pot," Abel said, his voice slick and oily. "Every soul in this town, all in one neat little pile, worth more than all the gold in the hills, I'd say." He pushed himself off the doorframe and took a step into the vault. He pulled a deck of cards from his vest pocket. The cards were yellowed, stained, and looked impossibly old. He fanned them out with his good hand. "The preacher tells you of sin and confession," Abel said with a smirk. "But I'm a pragmatist. Everything in this world and the next is a wager, a game of chance." He looked from Jonah to the box of figures. "Jedediah bound them here, but a binding is just a knot, and any knot can be untied, or a new one can be tied." He fixed his gaze on Jonah. "I'll make you a wager, mapmaker. One hand of cards. You win, I show you how to unravel one of these knots. Free a soul. Weaken the maze. Might even show you a true path for an hour. A real straight line out of here. And if I lose? Jonah asked, his voice low. Three-fingered Abel's smirk widened. If you lose, he said, tapping the side of his own head with a scarred finger, I take a memory, not a bad one, not your first kiss or your mother's face, just a simple, useful one, like how to read a compass, or the memory of which way you came in. A small price for a chance at salvation, wouldn't you say? He shuffled the cards with a soft, hypnotic riffle. The sound filled the cold, silent vault. So, do you feel lucky, friend? Chapter 9. A Debt of Memory. Jonah's mind raced. This was another test, another rule in the town's cruel game. The preacher offered a path of morality, of penance. The gambler offered a shortcut, a path of pure chance. Both felt like traps. He looked at the box of carved figures, at the tiny, tormented souls trapped in wood. If what Abel said was true, if he could free one, it might create a flaw in the labyrinth, a moment of weakness he could exploit. But the cost of losing was terrifying. To lose a memory here, in a place that preyed on confusion, was a crippling blow. He thought of the compass, its needle vibrating uselessly. The memory of how to use it was already worthless. It was a gamble, but everything he had done since arriving had been a gamble, following the arrows, playing Lottie's game, entering this vault. One hand, Jonah said, his voice steadier than he felt. Abel's eyes lit up. He gestured to a large, overturned crate in the corner of the vault. The table awaits. Jonah walked over and sat on a smaller, empty box. Abel sat opposite him, the crate between them. The only light came from Jonah's lantern, casting their shadows long and dancing on the steel walls of the vault. The gambler placed the ancient deck of cards on the crate. The game is high card, Abel said, his voice smooth as worn velvet. Simple, elegant, I cut the deck, you cut the deck. Highest card wins, ace is high, no tricks, no sleight of hand, just the pure, unvarnished will of fate, he smiled. Or whatever passes for fate in this miserable place. He placed his three-fingered hand on the deck, his thumb and two fingers pressing down. With a flick of his wrist, he expertly cut the deck, lifting a clean half and placing it beside the other. He turned over the top card, the Queen of Spades. Her face was faded, her expression severe and judgmental. "A respectable lady," Abel commented, leaning back. "Your turn, mapmaker." Jonah reached out, his hand hesitating over the remaining half of the deck. This was absurd. He was playing cards with a ghost for his own memories. He took a breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He thought of the straight, clean lines of his survey maps, the certainty of his numbers. This was the opposite of that. This was chaos. He had to embrace it. He did not try to cut a specific number of cards. He simply closed his eyes for a second, let his hand fall, and lifted a section of the deck. He placed it on the crate and, with a sense of profound finality, turned over the top card. The King of Hearts. His face was bearded, his expression noble. He held a sword behind his head as if reluctant to use it. Jonah had won. A flicker of genuine surprise, then annoyance, crossed Abel's face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his oily smirk. But Jonah had seen it. The gambler had not expected to lose. "Well, well," Abel chuckled, though the sound was hollow. "The greenhorn has the devil's own luck." He scooped up the cards and slipped them back into his vest. "A deal is a deal." He stood and walked over to the box of carved figures. He rummaged through them for a moment before picking one out. He held it up to the lantern light. It was the figure of a man with a pickaxe held over his shoulder. "This is Thomas," Abel said. "The one you met in the mossy tunnel. A good man. Died in a cave-in trying to hold a beam up so the others could get out. His regret is strong. It holds the west wall of the maze together. A load-bearing soul, you might say." He handed the small wooden figure to Jonah. It was cool to the touch. "A binding of blood must be undone with a sacrifice of will. Take him. Find a place that was important to him. A place of peace, not pain. Leave the effigy there. If your intent is true, if you truly wish to release him and not just use him to escape, the knot will unravel. The curse will weaken." Jonah closed his hand around the figure. "A place of peace. In this town." Abel laughed, a real guttural laugh this time. "An excellent question. Jedediah didn't leave many. But Thomas, he was a reader. His wife sent him books. He used to sit behind the blacksmith's shop where the sun would hit in the late afternoon. He said it was the only place he could hear himself think over the hammering." The gambler's form began to waver just as the preacher's had. "Now for my other promise, a true path." He pointed a single, scarred finger towards the vault door. "For 1 hour the path to the blacksmith's shop will be straight. No tricks, no loops. The town will allow it. It is the price of your win. Use the time wisely, mapmaker. The house always gets its due eventually." He dissolved, fading into the cold air of the vault, leaving only the lingering scent of stale whiskey and cheap cigars. Jonah was alone with the silent, wooden population of Merrow's Reach. He wasted no time. He stuffed the ledger back in his pocket and walked out of the vault, the small carving of Thomas clutched tight in his hand. He stepped out of the bank into the morning light. The town looked the same, warped, menacing, wrong. But as he turned towards where the blacksmith's shop should be, he saw it. A path. It was not a physical road, but a shimmer in the air, a subtle straightening of the space between him and his destination. The buildings on either side seemed to bend away slightly, creating a clear, direct corridor through the chaos. It was a line, a true, straight line. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He started to run. He didn't know how long he had or if Abel's hour was measured in human time. He ran past the sagging porches and the vacant, staring windows. The path held. The world did not twist or fold around him. For the first time, he was moving through this place on his own terms. He found the blacksmith's shop, a large barn-like structure with a massive cold forge. He ran around to the back. There, sheltered from the wind, was a small, clear patch of ground. A single, flat-topped boulder sat against the back wall, bathed in the warm light of the mid-morning sun. This was the place. He could feel it. A small bubble of tranquility in an ocean of misery. He knelt by the boulder. He took the small wooden figure of Thomas from his pocket. He held it in both hands, his mind focused. He thought of the man's sacrifice, the feeling of his final, selfless moments he had experienced in the tunnel. He was not using him. He was trying to free him. "Rest now," Jonah whispered, the words feeling foolish and necessary at the same time. "Your work is done." He placed the effigy on the flat surface of the sun-warmed boulder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the small wooden figure began to glow with a soft, white light. The light intensified, becoming almost too bright to look at. A faint, musical note hung in the air. The figure levitated an inch off the rock, and then, with a sound like a sigh, it dissolved into a shower of brilliant, white sparks which faded before they touched the ground. It was gone. And as the last spark vanished, Jonah felt it. A tremor ran through the entire town. It was not a physical earthquake, but a deep structural groan, a sound of immense pressure being released. In the distance, he heard a crash, the sound of stone giving way. A wall had fallen. A path had been cleared. The maze had been weakened. He had done it. He had changed the map. A wave of dizziness swept over him. He leaned against the boulder to steady himself. His head felt light. There was a strange emptiness, a blank spot in his thoughts. He tried to focus. What had he been doing just before this? He remembered the vault. He remembered winning the card game, but the details were foggy. What were the stakes? What had he won? What had he risked? He reached into his pocket for his compass. He pulled it out. He knew what it was. He knew it was supposed to point north. But for the life of him, he could not remember why that was important. The concept of cardinal directions, the fundamental basis of his entire life's work, was a vague, abstract idea. He had the memory of the word north, but the meaning behind it was gone. Abel hadn't taken the memory of how to read a compass. He had taken the memory of why he would need to. Chapter 10: The Architect of Ruin. The blankness in his mind was a new kind of terror. It wasn't the sharp, external fear of the hound or the psychological claustrophobia of Lottie's game. This was an internal erosion, a hollowing out of his own identity. He stared at the compass in his hand, the needle quivering erratically. The word north was a label for a chapter in a book he had forgotten how to read. Abel had been a liar. The price of the game hadn't been a small, useless memory. It had been a cornerstone of his reality. A wave of fury, cold and sharp, cut through his confusion. He was being dismantled, not just physically trapped but mentally disassembled. He shoved the useless compass back into his pocket. If the old rules were gone, he would have to rely completely on the new ones. The rules of this place. He pulled out the ledger and the sharp stone. He knelt in the dust behind the blacksmith's shop, in the small sanctuary he had created for Thomas's soul, and began to draw. He added the new symbols to his growing map of madness, the effigy, the sun-warmed rock, the fading light. He drew the gambler's three-fingered hand and the king of hearts. He added a question mark next to the word north. He was not just mapping the town anymore. He was mapping his own decay. As he worked, a new sound reached him. It wasn't a scraping or a whisper. It was the rhythmic, metallic creak of a pump handle. Squeak, thunk, squeak, thunk. It was a sound of human labor, of function. It was coming from the center of town. Jonah got to his feet, his new map of symbols and sorrows committed to memory. He moved with a new sense of purpose. Every strange event, every encounter was a clue. The town was communicating, teaching him its language through torment. He walked away from the blacksmith's shop, leaving the true, straight path behind. It had already dissolved back into the town's warped reality. He was back in the maze. He navigated by instinct and by the landmarks he was beginning to recognize, not by their location, but by their emotional resonance. The bank was a place of secrets. The church, a place of confrontation. The main street, a place of exposure. He moved towards the sound, and the town seemed to allow it, the paths bending to guide him, as if it were curious to see what he would do next. He arrived at the town well. It stood in a small, dusty plaza he hadn't seen before. The well was made of dark, fitted stones, and mounted on it was a heavy cast-iron hand pump, rusted but intact. A figure was working the handle, their back to him. It was a woman, her movements strong and steady. She wore a simple, patched dress, and her hair was tied back in a practical bun. As he got closer, he saw she was not pumping water. The spout was dry, clogged with a century of dust. She was simply working the mechanism, generating the rhythmic, lonely sound. She seemed unaware of his approach. Jonah stopped 10 feet away. He had learned not to rush these encounters. "Hello." The woman stopped pumping. She did not turn around. "The water remembers," she said, her voice quiet but clear. It was a voice of profound sadness. "Every drop that was pulled from this well holds a piece of what happened here, a piece of the thirst." "What thirst?" Jonah asked. "Not for water," the woman said, finally turning. Her face was plain, etched with lines of worry and hard work. It was the face from the wooden effigy he had held in the vault, the blacksmith's wife. Her spectral form was semi-transparent. He could see the decaying buildings of the plaza through her. It was a sickness. It came a year after the gold, a fever that dried you out from the inside. It took the children first. Lottie was one of the first to go. The pieces clicked into place. The desiccating touch of the stones. The town's obsession with water, with thirst. It was all rooted in a plague. "We thought it was the water from the mine," she continued, her gaze distant, lost in her own tragic memory. "We sealed the promised shaft. But the sickness didn't stop. People grew desperate. They started listening to the preacher. He said it was a spiritual malady, a punishment for their greed." "And Jedediah," Jonah pressed. "What did he think?" The woman's sad eyes focused on him. "He was the architect of our ruin. He was a surveyor like you, a man of numbers. He didn't believe in the preacher's gods or curses. He believed in patterns. He told everyone the sickness was a flaw in the land itself, a poison in the very rock. He said he could fix it. He said he could remap the foundation of the town, redirect the flow of the poison." She gestured to the ground with a translucent hand. "He used his knowledge, his tools, but he wasn't fixing a flaw. He was giving the poison a shape, a consciousness. He performed a ritual. He used the blood of his murdered partner to power it. He used the effigies to link all of us to it. He wasn't trying to save us. He was trying to control the sickness, to turn it into a tool. He wanted to use its power to find the absolution he was looking for." She looked at him, her form flickering. "He did not banish the sickness. He gave it a mind. He gave it his mind. When he was done, the fever was gone, but we were all trapped, trapped inside his madness. This town is not his ghost, surveyor. It is his legacy. A living machine built from a curse, powered by our suffering." Jonah felt a profound chill. Jedediah wasn't a victim. He was a monster a man of science and logic who had embraced black magic to serve his own selfish, twisted ends. He had built this hell deliberately. "Can he be stopped?" Jonah asked. The blacksmith's wife shook her head slowly. "A machine can be broken. How do you stop a map? How do you kill a set of rules?" Her form began to fade. "He is strongest at his center, the place where he performed the ritual, the place where he laid the first stone of his new mad reality, the surveyor's office." Her voice became a whisper carried on the wind. "But be warned, his first creation still guards it, the thing he made to protect his work, the unminer." She was gone. The rhythmic creaking of the pump was gone. The plaza was silent again. Jonah looked around. The surveyor's office. He remembered seeing it on the old town plat near the promised shaft. But where was it now in this constantly shifting world? He looked down at his own crude map in the dust. He had symbols for the rules he had learned, but he had no symbol for Jedediah. He needed to understand the architect. He needed to think like him. Jedediah was a man of logic who had embraced the irrational. He had imposed a system on the chaos. Jonah began to walk, letting the town guide him again. He didn't look for a building. He looked for a place of absolute, deliberate order in the midst of the chaos, a place that felt like a beginning. He found it a short time later. It was a perfect square of scorched, barren earth. In the exact center of the square was a single brass marker, the kind used to denote a primary survey point. It was gleaming, untarnished by time. The area around it felt stable. The warping of the world seemed to lessen here. This was the nexus, the anchor point of Jedediah's curse. And at the edge of the square stood a small, windowless building made of black, basalt-like stone. It was perfectly symmetrical, its lines sharp and true. The surveyor's office. The door was a single slab of stone. There was no handle, no lock. As he approached, he saw a single, deep carving in its center. It was the symbol from Jedediah's ledger, the circle eating its own tail with a straight line cutting through it, the choice he had faced in the mine. He reached out and traced the line with his finger. As his finger completed the path, the stone door began to grind open, receding into the wall. He was being invited in. He took out his lantern and stepped over the threshold. The room was circular. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with maps, hundreds of them, maps of the town, each one different, each one showing a different configuration of the streets and buildings. It was a library of every form the labyrinth had ever taken. And in the center of the room, standing before a large, flat-topped stone table, was the unminer. It was holding its sharp-edged tool, its blank face turned towards him. It had been waiting. It raised its tool not in aggression but in a gesture of presentation, pointing towards the stone table. On the table, held down by heavy stone paperweights, was a final map. It was drawn on clean, modern vellum. The ink was fresh. It was a map of the town as it was right now, a perfect, surveyor-grade plat of the current labyrinth. And in the center, marked with a precise X, was the surveyor's office. The map showed a single path leading away from the office, a straight line that cut through the chaos and led out into the open desert, an escape route. At the bottom of the map, in elegant, terrifyingly familiar script, were two words: "For Jonah Hale." The unminer scraped its tool on the floor, an attention-getting sound. It pointed one of its long, stony fingers at Jonah. Then it pointed at the map. And then it pointed at its own smooth, featureless chest. The message was clear. A trade, the map the way out for him. Chapter 11. An unacceptable offer. The air in the circular room was cold and dead. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of Jonah's own ragged breathing. The unminer stood perfectly still, its offer hanging in the air, as tangible as the stone table between them. The map was a promise of everything Jonah craved: escape, freedom, a return to the world of straight lines and solid ground. Its existence was a paradox, a rational solution presented by an irrational jailer. Jonah looked from the pristine map to the creature. It was a guardian, but it was also a tool. It had erased Jedediah's markings in the mine. It protected this office. It served the will of the labyrinth's architect. This offer was not the creature's own idea. This was Jedediah speaking through his creation. "What do you want me for?" Jonah asked, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. The unminer did not respond with sound. It simply tapped its chest again, then pointed to the hundreds of maps lining the walls. The meaning was chillingly clear. The town needed a surveyor. Jedediah's consciousness was spread thin, his madness the fuel for the ever-shifting reality. Perhaps he was weakening. Perhaps he was tired. He needed a replacement, a new architect to maintain the prison. He was offering Jonah the one thing he thought a map maker could not refuse, the ultimate map to solve. He was offering him the job of being the new god of this private hell. Jonah thought of the blank space in his mind where the concept of north used to be. That was the first alteration, the first step in remaking him into something that could belong here. If he stayed, he would be hollowed out completely, his own mind becoming the blueprint for a new configuration of the maze. "No," Jonah said, the word a small, hard stone of defiance in the immense silence. He expected the creature to attack. He expected the room to shift, the door to seal. Instead, the unminer seemed to slump, a barely perceptible deflation of its form, like a sigh of disappointment made of rock. It slowly, deliberately reached for the map on the table. Its sharp-edged tool scraped across the vellum, and in a single, clean motion it erased the path leading to the desert. The way out was gone. The creature then turned its blank face back to Jonah. It raised its tool and pointed it at him, no longer an offering but a threat. It took a slow, grinding step forward. Jonah backed away, his lantern beam held before him like a flimsy shield. He had refused the role of architect. Now he was just another flaw in the design, an anomaly to be erased. He bumped against the curved wall, his eyes darting around the room. The maps, hundreds of them, they were the key. They were the town's memory, its history of madness. The unminer advanced, its strange, shuffling gait closing the distance between them. Jonah broke from the wall and ran, circling the stone table. The creature was slow but relentless. He couldn't outrun it forever in this confined space. He needed a weapon. He needed a plan. He looked at the maps again. An idea born of desperation and a flash of insight into Jedediah's own nature took root. Jedediah was a man of systems. He built this place with rules. Even the maps on the wall must follow a pattern. He scanned the swirling chaos of lines and symbols. Was there an order, chronological, alphabetical? He saw it, a small brass plaque on the wall, almost hidden behind a roll of maps. It read, Configurations by Lunar Cycle. Jedediah, the man of science, had organized his magical labyrinth according to the phases of the moon. It was the perfect fusion of logic and superstition. Jonah ran to the wall, his fingers searching the scrolls. Full moon, waning gibbous, first quarter. He pulled one out. The paper was old, brittle. He unrolled it. It was a map of the town in a configuration he didn't recognize. At the bottom, a note in Jedediah's spidery hand. The night of the red harvest. The foundation's scream. The unminer was closing in, its tool raised. Jonah grabbed another map. New moon. The hound is hungriest when the sky is black. He was holding the town's operating manual. But how could he use it? He looked at the stone table in the center of the room. It was bare now, save for the stone paperweights. It was the focal point of the chamber, a presentation space, an altar. What if it wasn't just for showing maps, but for choosing them? It was an insane gamble. The unminer was only a few feet away, its presence a wave of absolute cold. Jonah scrambled onto the table, his boots skidding on the smooth stone. He took the new moon map, the one that spoke of the hound, and spread it flat on the stone surface. He held it down with his hands. "I choose this one," he yelled, his voice raw. "Change it, show me the hound's maze." The unminer stopped, its blank head tilted. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, immense pressure. The walls began to vibrate. The maps began to rattle in their shelves. A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, the sound of the entire town's engine being thrown into a different gear. The unminer looked down at the map on the table. It looked up at Jonah. Then it turned and began to walk towards the stone door, its purpose diverted. It had a new directive. The architect had accepted a new blueprint. The stone door slid shut behind the creature. Jonah was alone. The humming intensified. The very stone beneath him felt like it was turning to liquid. The world outside the office was being forcibly reshaped into the map he had chosen. He had seized the controls. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, he was the architect. The vibration stopped. A profound silence fell. He had done it. He had changed the maze. But he had changed it into a configuration specifically designed to empower its most fearsome predator. He had traded one immediate threat for a much larger, more dangerous one. He jumped off the table. He had to get out of the office before the hound, now strengthened and unleashed in its own personal hunting ground, found him. He ran to the stone door. He traced the symbol again. Nothing happened. He tried again. The door remained sealed. He was trapped. He had saved himself from the unminer only to lock himself in a cage, while outside the Angle hound roamed a world made just for it. He slumped against the door, the bitter irony washing over him. He had tried to be the architect, and had only succeeded in building a better prison for himself. He listened. The silence from outside was absolute, too absolute. He crept to the wall and hesitantly pulled out a different map, a map of the current configuration, the new moon maze. He unrolled it on the floor. It was a tangle of dead-end alleys and looping streets. He traced the lines, his surveyor's eye trying to find a pattern. He saw the surveyor's office, marked with an X. It had no exits. It was an island in the middle of the labyrinth. But there was something else. A small secondary mark he hadn't noticed before near the edge of the map. It was a drawing of a single gnarled tree hung with broken pocket watches. The pocket watch tree. Cassidy had mentioned it, a place where time itself was broken. And from the tree, a faint dotted line led off the edge of the map, followed by a single cryptic word: maybe. It was not an escape. It was a possibility, a flaw in Jedediah's own design. But to get to it, he had to get out of this sealed room. He looked around the chamber at the walls covered in maps. He was surrounded by paper, old, dry, brittle paper. And in his pocket, he had a lighter, a simple plastic butane lighter he carried for emergencies. He had almost forgotten about it. In a world of ghosts and impossible geometry, it felt like a relic of a dead civilization. He could not break the door down, but perhaps he could burn it down. Not the stone door itself, but the curse that powered it, the very information that held it together. He took a deep breath. This was the most dangerous gamble yet. He would be destroying the only knowledge of the maze that existed. He would be running blind. He walked to the center of the room. He began to pull the maps from their shelves, throwing them into a pile on the floor. The history of Marrow's Reach, the diary of a madman. He would turn it all to ash. Chapter 12. The Ash of Knowledge. The pile of maps grew, a chaotic mound of brittle paper and faded ink in the center of the circular room. Each scroll he added felt like an act of irreversible vandalism. He was destroying his only guide, his only insight into the enemy's mind. But that mind was a prison, and the guide was the blueprint of his own cage. To escape, he had to blind his jailer, even if it meant blinding himself in the process. He pulled down the last of the accessible maps, the paper tearing, the scrolls unrolling to reveal more twisted streets and cryptic notes. The day the sky wept rust, the hour of the silent choir. Each one was a different flavor of hell. He stood before the pile, the plastic lighter feeling small and inadequate in his hand. He thumbed the ignition wheel. A tiny flame sputtered to life, a small, brave orange teardrop in the immense, cold dark of the office. It was the first honest light he had seen since arriving, a light born of simple chemistry, not of ghostly children or cursed lanterns. He hesitated for a second. Was he unleashing something worse? What happened when a cursed place lost its memory? The alternative was to sit here and wait for the hound to eventually claw its way through the stone. He touched the flame to the edge of a map. The old, dry paper caught instantly. A line of black and orange fire raced along its edge, consuming a century of madness in a heartbeat. The flame leaped to another scroll, then another. The pile ignited with a sudden whoosh, a wave of heat pushing him back. The fire was unnaturally voracious, burning with a strange, smokeless intensity. It was consuming not just paper, but the arcane energy woven into it. The light of the fire filled the room, casting huge, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air grew thick with heat. He could feel the power in the room shifting, the ambient hum rising in pitch to a painful shriek. The stone door began to vibrate violently. Cracks appeared on its surface, not from the heat, but from the disruption of the curse that held it together. The fire roared, a cleansing, terrifying pyre of knowledge. Jonah shielded his face with his arm, the heat blistering. Through the shimmering air, he saw the carvings on the wall, the maps of this place, begin to flicker and fade, the stone itself unable to hold the memory as the paper originals were unmade by the flames. With a final, deafening crack, the stone door shattered. It did not explode outward. It imploded, collapsing into a pile of black dust and rubble, leaving the way open. Jonah didn't wait. He ran from the office, out of the suffocating heat and into the cold, still air of the maze. He was free of the room, but he was now in a world without a map, a world he had deliberately rendered unknowable. The configuration was still the new moon maze, the hound's hunting ground. He had only destroyed the blueprints. He stood in the scorched, empty square, his heart hammering. He needed to find the pocket-watch tree. He had a rough idea of its location from the map he had burned, but navigating this shifting, hostile world by memory was a fool's errand. He had to rely on something else. The inward compass, the town's cruel mechanism for pulling him towards his own regrets. He had been fighting it, resisting it. What if he used it? What if he could force it to point him not towards a past failure, but towards a future hope? The concept of north was gone, but the mechanism of the pull remained. He closed his eyes. He focused his will. He did not think of escape, of the desert, of the sane world. That was an abstraction. He focused on a concrete image, a gnarled tree, broken watches hanging from its branches, a dotted line leading away. He pictured it with all the intensity he could muster, trying to make the idea of the tree his new psychological true north. He tried to invest his desire for this one object with the weight of all his past regrets. He opened his eyes and began to walk, letting his feet choose the path. He followed the subtle, invisible gradient of the town's pull, surrendering to the force that had tormented him. He walked through the dark, looping streets. The silence was unnerving. He had expected to be hunted, to hear the scraping of the angle hound at his heels. But the world was still. Had burning the maps confused it, disoriented it? He passed a row of houses, their windows like vacant skulls. From inside one he heard a faint sound, a man humming a tune. It was a simple, cheerful melody, but in the oppressive silence it was deeply unsettling. He paused, listening. It was the ghost of a miner, caught in a loop of a happy memory, oblivious to the hell around him. The town was full of these trapped echoes, the background radiation of the curse. He kept moving, trusting the pull. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more decayed. He was entering a part of the town that felt older, more forgotten. And then he saw it. It stood in a small, circular clearing. The pocket-watch tree. It was exactly as the map had depicted. A dead, black tree, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. From them hung dozens of pocket watches, their silver and gold casings glinting dully in the starlight. Each was stopped at a different time. As he approached, a chorus of soft ticking began, a sound that grew louder with every step. The watches were not all dead. Some were still running, their tiny mechanical hearts beating out of sync with each other, creating a chaotic, whispering symphony of time. He reached the tree. The air around it was strange, viscous, and heavy. He felt a sense of temporal drag as if he were wading through molasses. He looked at the watches. One was stopped at 3:15, another at 12:00. A third was running backward. This was a place where time itself was broken, frayed at the edges. He remembered the dotted line on the map. The word maybe. It had started here at the base of the tree. He searched the ground. There was no path, no tunnel, nothing. He looked closer at the tree trunk. It was covered in carvings, not the frantic scrawls of Jedediah, but names, initials, dates. TM 1881. SB plus LP forever. It was a lover's tree, a place where the townsfolk had come to carve their hopes for the future into the bark. In a town built on greed and despair, this was a small, defiant monument to hope. And at the base of the trunk, half buried in the soil, was a small metal box, a time capsule. It was rusted, dented, but sealed. Jonah dug it out with his bare hands, the cold metal shocking his fingers. He pried the lid open with a groan of protesting metal. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single object. It was not a map. It was not a tool. It was a beautiful, ornate silver compass. It was far too elegant for a place like this. Its needle was not a simple sliver of metal. It was shaped like a slender, pointing finger, intricately detailed down to the knuckle and nail. And it was not pointing north. It was spinning, slowly, hypnotically, as if searching for something it could not find. He picked it up. As his fingers touched the silver casing, the spinning needle stopped. It froze, pointing not towards a direction, but directly at him. A voice spoke, seeming to come from the compass itself. It was a woman's voice, calm and clear. "So you found me," it said. "I was beginning to wonder." Jonah stared at the compass, his blood running cold. "Who are you?" "I am the one who drew the dotted line," the voice said. "The one who left the maybe. Jedediah was not the only one who could make a map. I was his wife, and I was a cartographer too." Chapter 13. The Cartographer's Wife. Jonah's hand clenched around the silver compass. The voice emanating from it was impossible, yet in Marrow's reach. It was just another layer of the nightmare's logic. Jedediah's wife. Another player in this tragedy, one whose existence had been completely erased from the records he had seen. "Your husband, he built this place," Jonah said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the pointing finger of the compass needle. "He trapped everyone." "He did not build it, he corrupted it," the voice from the compass replied, a subtle but important distinction. Her tone was not ethereal or ghostly, it was direct, imbued with a sharp, weary intelligence. This land was always thin, a place where belief and reality were more fluid. The first people knew it. They respected it. Jedediah saw it only as a resource to be exploited. He didn't create the machine, he just wrote the code that made it a prison. The compass needle trembled slightly, as if with emotion. "I tried to stop him. When I saw what he was doing with the effigies, with the blood of his partner, I confronted him. I told him he was damning us all. He called me a fool, blinded by superstition. He said he was creating a paradise, a world with no sickness, no decay, governed by his own perfect, rational design." "So he trapped you too," Jonah surmised. "Not in the same way," the voice said. Before he completed his great ritual, I knew I could not stop him, so I created a failsafe, a flaw in his perfect design. I am a cartographer, Mr. Hale. I deal in precision. I anchored my own consciousness not to the town, but to a concept he could never control, true north. He erased it from his world, but he could not erase it from reality. I am the ghost of a fixed point, a bug in his system. My spirit is tied to this compass. Jonah looked from the compass to the desolate, shifting town around him. But the needle, it's pointing at me. Jedediah's curse feeds on the suffering and confusion of the souls trapped within it. It has a taste for them. It has been trying to consume me for a century, but my anchor to a concept outside its reality has protected me. You, Jonah Hale, are an anomaly. You are not one of the original souls, and you have refused to be broken. You have erased his maps. You have unlearned his rules. You carry a piece of the outside world in you, a logic that is poison to this place. The compass is not pointing at you. It is pointing at the way out that you represent. A sliver of hope, colder and sharper than any he had felt before, pierced through Jonah's exhaustion. Can you guide me? Can this compass lead me out? No, the voice said flatly, dashing his hope as quickly as it had appeared. To guide you out, I would have to be outside, and to be outside, I would have to be free. And Jedediah bound me as surely as he bound all the others. Her voice grew fainter. He did not use an effigy for me. He used my heart. He buried it at the heart of his own power, the place where his control is absolute, the promised shaft. The mine, the place Cassidy had warned him against, the place he had fled from. If my heart is destroyed, the voice continued, my spirit will be untethered. For a brief moment before I fade completely, I will be free of this place. In that moment, the compass will work. It will point true. It will show you the way, but only for a moment. And he will not make it easy. The mine is his inner sanctum. It is where his consciousness is most concentrated. Jonah's path was clear. It was, as always, the most dangerous one imaginable. He had to descend back into the darkness, find the heart of a ghost, and destroy it, all while being hunted by the master of the labyrinth himself. How do I get back into the mine? Jonah asked. The way I came in is gone. When you burned the maps, you did more than just blind him, the voice explained. You severed the connections between the different configurations. The world outside is now unanchored, but the mine is constant. It is the foundation. There is always a way in. Jedediah needed one for himself. Find the place where he made his first kill, the place where he spilled the blood that powered his curse. The entrance will be there. The memory of the split, blood-soaked effigy of Jedediah's partner flashed in Jonah's mind. He had to find a murder scene. He looked around the clearing. The ticking of the watches seemed to mock him. He had his guide. He had his destination. Now he just had to survive the journey. He clipped the silver compass to his belt, the needle pointing steadfastly at his own chest, a constant, chilling reminder of his role in this final act. He began to walk, leaving the temporal chaos of the pocket watch tree behind. He no longer needed to use his own regrets as a guide. He focused on a new concept, malice. He searched for a place that felt not just sad or frightening, but actively hateful, a place of profound betrayal. The town was quieter now. The ambient sounds of humming ghosts seemed to have faded. It felt as if all the loose, chaotic energy of the place was being drawn inward, consolidating, preparing. The sky above, which had been a clear, cold canvas of stars, was beginning to cloud over. The clouds were dark, bruised-looking, and they swirled in slow, unnatural patterns. The master of the maze was aware of him, and he was angry. Jonah found the spot in a narrow, rocky canyon just outside the main cluster of buildings. It was a place of old tailings, piles of worthless rock discarded from the first exploratory digs. A makeshift miners' camp had once stood here. The ground was littered with rusted, skeletal remains of pans and shovels, and in the center of it all was a dark, ugly stain on the rocks, a place where something terrible had happened, a stain that a century of sun and rain had not been able to bleach away. As he approached, the ground began to tremble. The pile of tailings shifted, rocks tumbling down its side. The earth itself seemed to split open, revealing not a tunnel or a shaft, but a gaping, jagged wound in the rock. A flight of crude stone steps descended into an impenetrable, waiting darkness. "This is it," the voice from the compass whispered. "Be careful, Mr. Hale. Down there you will not be walking through his memory. You will be walking through his mind." Jonah took out his lighter and a torch he had fashioned from a table leg and a strip of his own shirt, soaked in the last of the truck's lamp oil he'd found. He lit the torch. The flame was small, but it would have to do. He took a deep breath and began his final descent. The stairs were steep and uneven. The air grew dense, carrying the familiar scent of wet stone and old blood. After 100 steps, the stairs ended and he was in a tunnel. But this was unlike the tunnels he had navigated before. The walls were not rough-hewn rock covered in frantic scrawls. They were smooth, polished black stone, which seemed to absorb the light of his torch. And embedded in the walls, like veins in marble, were shimmering, golden lines. They pulsed with a soft, internal light, like circuits on a motherboard. He was not in a mine. He was inside the machine. He followed the tunnel. There were no junctions, no choices to be made. There was only one path. The golden circuits on the wall pulsed faster as he moved deeper, the rhythm matching the frantic beat of his own heart. He heard a sound ahead, a soft, rhythmic thumping. Thump, 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 thump. The tunnel opened into a massive, spherical cavern. The golden lines snaked across every surface, all converging on the very center of the space. And there, suspended in the air by a web of pulsing golden energy, was a human heart. It was blackened, petrified, but it was still beating. Thump, 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 thump. The sound echoed through the chamber. It was the heart of Jedediah's wife, the power source for the compass and the anchor of her spirit. But it was not unguarded. Standing directly beneath the heart, his back to Jonah, was a figure. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in the dusty, decaying clothes of a 19th-century surveyor. His hands, resting at his sides, were stained with dried blood. He turned slowly. His face was a mask of obsessive, intelligent fury. His eyes burned with a dark, consuming fire. This was no ghost. This was no memory. This was the man himself, the architect, Jedediah Keene. "So," Jedediah said, his voice a low, grating sound like rock grinding on rock, "the anomaly arrives at the engine room. I must thank you, burning my library, freeing the lesser souls. You have consolidated my power wonderfully. All the loose ends are now tied. Everything is back where it belongs. He smiled, a cold, thin-lipped expression. Everything but you. Chapter 14. The Heart of the Maze. Jedediah Keene stood as the nexus of the golden energy which filled the cavern. The lines of light pulsing in the walls seemed to originate from him, flowing through him to the petrified heart suspended overhead. He was not just a spirit, he was the central processor, the living will that animated the entire labyrinth. "You are trespassing," Jedediah continued, his voice resonating with the power of the cavern itself. "In my home, in my work, in my mind." He took a step forward and the very geometry of the floor seemed to ripple around his boots. "I offered you a position, a purpose. You could have been my apprentice, my successor. Instead, you choose to be a vandal, a rat chewing at the foundations of my creation." Jonah held his torch aloft, its small flame a flickering point of defiance against the overwhelming, calculated power of the room. "You created a hell." "I created order," Jedediah roared, the sound shaking the very stone. "I brought logic to a chaotic world. The sickness was entropy, the suffering was random. I gave it a grammar, I gave it rules, I gave it a purpose, my purpose." His eyes, burning with a feverish intensity, narrowed. "You, a man of lines and numbers, should appreciate that. Instead, you ally yourself with sentiment." He gestured upwards at the beating heart. "With her." "Let her go," Jonah said. "Let them all go." Jedediah laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Release the power source. Decommission the engine. Never. They are my masterpiece. A perpetual motion machine fueled by regret. And now I will add your own unique energy to the mix." He raised his hand. From the polished black wall behind him, a section began to extrude, flowing like liquid stone. It solidified, taking a familiar, terrifying shape, the shifting, impossible form of the angle hound. It was smaller than the one he had encountered before, a more concentrated version, its facets gleaming with the same golden light as the circuits in the walls. "I grow tired of these games," Jedediah said. "It is time to erase the error." The golden hound leaped from the wall, its movement a silent, fluid refolding of space. It shot towards Jonah. There was no room to run, no maze to hide in. This was a direct confrontation. Jonah reacted on pure instinct. He swung his makeshift torch in a wide arc. The flame met the creature's form. There was a sound like a circuit shorting out, a high-pitched squeal. The golden light of the hound flickered violently. The creature recoiled, its form momentarily losing cohesion, becoming a cloud of agitated geometric shapes before solidifying again. It was afraid of the fire. The raw, chaotic energy of the flame was anathema to the cold, calculated nature of Jedediah's curse. It was the one thing in this world he could not perfectly control. "An unpredictable variable," Jedediah mused, his expression one of annoyed curiosity rather than fear. "No matter. There are other ways to deconstruct a man." He waved his other hand. The floor around Jonah began to soften. The black stone turned malleable, and from it rose figures. They were the unminers, half-formed and incomplete, their featureless faces turned towards him. They were armed not with tools of erasure, but with simple, brutal clubs of stone. The hound attacked again, its fear of the flame making it more cautious. It darted in, trying to get past the torch. Jonah fended it off, a desperate dance of fire and geometry. At the same time the stone constructs closed in, their movements slow but inexorable. He was being herded, cornered. "Your will is strong, I'll grant you that," came the voice of the cartographer's wife from the compass at his belt. "But you cannot fight them all. The heart, Jonah, you must destroy the heart." He looked up. The petrified heart beat on, suspended 20 feet in the air, the focal point of all the room's power. It was untouchable. He was trapped on the floor, fighting for his life. He needed to get up there. He backed away, the torch held before him, keeping the hound at bay. The stone creatures swung their clubs, their blows heavy and slow. He dodged one, then another. He was being pushed towards the center of the room, directly beneath the heart, exactly where Jedediah wanted him. As he fought, his eyes scanned the cavern. He saw the golden lines, the circuits of power. They all flowed from Jedediah to the heart. He was the source. If he could break that connection. He feinted towards the hound, then spun, throwing his torch not at the creatures but directly at Jedediah. The flaming brand flew through the air, end over end. Jedediah watched it come, a look of contempt on his face. He raised a hand to simply bat it away. But at that moment, Jonah did something else. He focused all his will, all his desperation on one of his stolen memories. He focused on the memory of Thomas, the miner he had freed. The feeling of the man's sacrifice, his selflessness. As the torch neared Jedediah, its simple orange flame flared, turning a brilliant, pure white. It was the same light he had seen when Thomas's effigy had dissolved. It was the light of a freed soul. The white-hot flame struck Jedediah's outstretched hand. He screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of outrage, of system shock. The pure, selfless energy of the released soul was a poison to his curse, which was built entirely on selfishness and regret. The golden light around him flickered. The lines of power running through the cavern dimmed. The beating of the heart overhead faltered for a second. The connection was weakened. Now, the compass screamed in his mind. Jedediah was clutching his hand, his face a mask of fury. The hound and the stone constructs had frozen, their power source momentarily disrupted. Jonah had bought himself a few seconds. He looked up. He could not climb, but he had one last tool. He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out the ledger, the book he had taken from the Assier's office, the record of Jedediah's original sin. He opened it to the back, to the frantic sketches of the mad surveyor. He held the book aloft, open to the page depicting the blasphemous two-steepled church. "Your work is flawed, Jedediah," he yelled, his voice raw. "Your logic is corrupt. This is your foundation, and it is built on a lie." He threw the book with all his might. It flew upwards, not at the heart, but at the web of golden energy that held it. The ledger, a simple object of paper and leather, struck the glowing strands. The effect was cataclysmic, introducing the physical record of the curse's creation back into the core of the machine created a feedback loop, a paradox the system could not resolve. A bolt of golden energy arced from the web, striking the book in midair. The ledger vaporized in a flash of light, but the damage was done. The web of energy containing the heart shattered. The golden lines throughout the cavern went dark. The petrified heart, freed from its prison, fell. It dropped through the air and landed on the stone floor with a crack, like a piece of shattered pottery. The moment it broke, a wave of pure white energy erupted from the fragments. It was not an explosion of force, but of release. The spirit of the cartographer's wife, freed from its century-long prison. The energy washed over the stone constructs and they crumbled into dust. It struck the angle hound, and the creature dissolved into a cascade of meaningless, inert shapes. Jedediah screamed, a long, drawn-out cry of despair and fury. The power that had sustained him, the stolen energy of the trapped souls, was gone. His form began to flicker violently, the stolen life draining out of him. He was becoming what he truly was, a simple, pathetic ghost. The cavern began to shake. The polished black walls cracked. Pieces of the ceiling began to fall. The entire machine was collapsing. Jonah looked at the compass on his belt. The silver needle was no longer pointing at him. It was spinning wildly, and then it locked into place, pointing not up but sideways directly at a section of the cavern wall. It was pointing north. It was pointing the way out. "The way is open, Jonah." The voice of the cartographer's wife was all around him now, faint and fading like the echo of a beautiful song. "But the maze is dying. It will take you with it if you stay. Run." Jonah ran. He sprinted towards the wall the compass indicated. As he reached it, the stone crumbled away, revealing a straight, clear tunnel filled with the pale, clean light of the outside world. He plunged into it, not looking back at the ghost of Jedediah Keene, who was being buried under the ruins of his own collapsing hell. Chapter 15. The Price of a Straight Line. The tunnel was a straight line, not a trick, not a temporary reprieve granted by a ghostly gambler, but a true, geometrically perfect path. The air grew warmer, fresher. The oppressive weight of the underground labyrinth lifted with every step. The light ahead grew brighter, resolving from a general glow into the distinct, sharp light of a desert afternoon. He burst out of the tunnel and stumbled into the open, his eyes, accustomed to darkness and torchlight, squeezed shut against the sudden, painful brilliance of the sun. He fell to his knees, his hands sinking into soft, warm sand. He took a deep, shuddering breath of clean, dry air. It was over. When his vision cleared, he looked back. There was no tunnel. There was no mine entrance. There was only a solid, sandstone cliff face, indistinguishable from the rest of the canyon. The way back was gone. The door to hell had closed behind him. He looked around. He was miles from where he had entered the town. The landscape was just desert, vast and empty under a clean, blue sky. In the distance, he could see the dark line of the paved road he had left 2 days or a lifetime ago. Of the town of Marrow's Reach there was no sign. No broken buildings, no accusing church steeple. It was as if it had been completely swallowed by the earth, its impossible existence collapsing in on itself when its engine was destroyed. It was gone. Jonah slowly got to his feet. He was exhausted, bruised, and mentally scarred in ways he would never be able to properly articulate. He checked his pockets. The lighter was gone. The ledger was ash. All he had left was the silver compass clipped to his belt. He looked at it. The needle, shaped like a delicate finger, was now still. It pointed north, a true, unwavering, absolute north. A concept he now understood again with perfect, painful clarity. The memory had returned. He smiled, a cracked, tired thing. He had won. He began the long walk towards the road. The sun beat down, but it was a clean, honest heat. The silence was the silence of nature, not the loaded, waiting silence of the town. He walked for hours. As dusk began to settle, he finally reached the asphalt. He sat on the shoulder of the road, the rough, man-made surface a profound comfort. He would wait. A car would come eventually. He looked at the compass again. The voice of Jedediah's wife was gone. Her spirit was free, faded into the world. He owed her his life, his sanity. He unclipped the compass from his belt, holding it in his palm. It was a beautiful object, a relic from a nightmare, a testament to his survival. As he looked at it, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A faint, almost invisible inscription etched around the rim of the compass, hidden in its ornate design. He had to angle it just right in the fading light to read it. It said, "Property of the Golden Promise Mining Company, one of a set." Jonah froze, one of a set. He suddenly understood. The compass wasn't just a vessel for her spirit. It was one of the original surveying tools. The town, the curse, was built using a system of powerful, sympathetic objects, the markers that had vanished, the ledger, the effigies, and these compasses. He had destroyed the heart of the machine. He had collapsed the labyrinth, but he had not destroyed all the pieces. He was holding one of them in his hand. A new, cold dread, entirely different from anything he had felt before, began to seep into him. He looked down at his hands, at his feet. He looked at the straight, perfect line of the road stretching into the distance. He had spent the last 2 days trapped in a world where straight lines were a lie, an illusion. A world governed by chaos and shifting, impossible angles. He had fought and bled and sacrificed memories to escape it, to get back to the sane, logical world of straight lines. But as he sat there on the edge of the road holding the compass, he felt a new, subtle wrongness. The straightness of the road seemed too perfect, too absolute. The horizon line was too clean. The world felt rigid, brittle, flat. It was as if all the beautiful, soft, chaotic imperfections of reality had been ironed out. He understood the final, terrible price of his escape. He had not just escaped the maze. He had carried a piece of its fundamental code out with him. The compass, now that its original owner was gone, was anchoring itself to him. Jedediah had built a world of chaos. Jonah, in his desperate flight, had inverted it. He was now the nexus of a new, creeping curse. A curse of absolute, terrifying order. A world with no soft edges, no unpredictable variables, no gentle curves. A world of nothing but straight, unforgiving lines. He looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. They weren't scattered in their familiar, random glory. They were arranged in a perfect, geometric grid. He had not escaped the map. He had just become a new one, and his prison was no longer a forgotten ghost town. It was the entire world. Chapter 16. The Unwavering Needle. The grid of stars was a silent, damning indictment. It was a pattern so fundamentally wrong, so offensive to the natural chaos of the cosmos, that it made the shifting madness of Marrow's reach seem almost comforting in retrospect. That had been a localized sickness. This, this was a systemic infection, and he was patient zero. He scrambled to his feet, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He looked down the road. The painted white line on the asphalt no longer appeared to recede with perspective. It was a perfect, unwavering stripe of white that shot to the horizon, defying the very laws of optics. The world had been flattened, its dimensions ironed out into a terrifyingly precise blueprint. His first instinct was to get rid of the compass. He drew his arm back, ready to hurl the silver object into the desert, to shatter it against a rock. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice was not in his head. It was real, spoken, and it came from behind him. Jonah spun around, his heart seizing in his chest. Standing on the road, bathed in the cold, geometric starlight, was Cassidy Finch. The old woman looked exactly as she had in the church, ancient, weary, and draped in shadows. But she was here, miles from the collapsed town, as solid and real as the unnervingly straight road beneath her feet. "How," Jonah stammered, "the town, it's gone." "The house is gone," she corrected, her voice a dry rustle. "But the foundation stones are still scattered about." She nodded towards the silver compass in his hand. "And you, mapmaker, decided to carry one away as a souvenir." "I have to destroy it," he said, his voice tight with desperation. "And destroy yourself with it." Cassidy took a slow step closer. "That compass is no longer just a tool. The spirit that inhabited it is gone. A vacuum was created. A power source needs a user. It has latched onto the nearest available will. Your will. It is bound to you now, as surely as Jedediah's wife was bound to her buried heart. If you break it, you break the part of yourself that it has claimed." "What part?" Jonah demanded. "What has it taken?" "Your belief in imperfection," she said simply. "Your acceptance of the crooked path. You fought so hard for a straight line out of that hell, you have forgotten that the real world is not made of them. You have imposed Jedediah's core desire, perfect, absolute order, onto the world around you. You have become the architect of a new, much larger prison." He could feel it now, the truth of her words resonating with the unnerving stillness of the landscape. The subtle, random sway of the desert scrub in the breeze was gone. The plants were all angled at a uniform 45 degrees. The silence wasn't empty. It was measured, a perfect absence of unapproved sound. "How do I stop it?" he pleaded. "How do I make it stop?" "The same way you stopped Jedediah," Cassidy said, her expression grim. "You must break the system. You hold one of the anchors, but there are others. A set of tools used to build the curse. The compass is one. There was also a chain, a transit, and a plumb bob. Each one was used to corrupt a different aspect of reality, direction, distance, level, and," she paused, "a cornerstone, the first piece of his new world." "Where are they?" "Scattered, lost. When the maze collapsed, the energy that held it together dissipated. The artifacts were flung far and wide. But they are drawn to each other, and they are drawn to their new master. They are drawn to you. They will find their way into your world. And every time one does, the curse of order will strengthen, Another layer of reality sanded smooth, another beautiful imperfection erased. A pair of headlights appeared on the horizon, a perfect sphere of light that did not grow or shrink, but simply moved closer at a constant, unvarying speed. "Your ride is here," Cassidy said, her form beginning to flicker at the edges, the curse affecting her spectral nature differently. A word of advice, Jonah Hale. Jedediah's weakness was his pride. He believed his system was perfect. You must learn to embrace the flaw. You must seek the crooked path, the irrational choice. The world's survival and your own depends on you learning to break your own rules. She dissolved into a swirl of dust, just as the preacher had, leaving Jonah alone on the perfectly straight road as the car approached. The car, an old, boxy sedan, pulled over with a movement devoid of any wasted motion. The door opened with a single, efficient click. The man behind the wheel was nondescript, his face placid, his eyes holding a placid, empty calmness. "You look like you need a ride," the man said, his voice a monotone without inflection. Jonah hesitated for a moment. He looked at the man, at the car. Everything about them was neat, orderly, clean, too clean. He knew with a sinking certainty that this was not a random Good Samaritan. This was the world reshaping itself around him, presenting him with the order he now unconsciously craved. This was the curse in action. He got in. The door shut with the satisfying thunk of a well-made machine. "Where are you headed?" the man asked, his eyes on the road. "East," Jonah said. It was the only direction he could think of. The man nodded. A good direction, direct, efficient. They drove in silence. Jonah watched the desert pass by. The landscape was a repeating pattern of perfectly spaced cacti and geometrically precise rock formations. It was like driving through a computer simulation. He looked at the man beside him. There was no sweat on his brow, no idle fidgeting of his hands on the wheel. He was a perfect driver in a perfect car on a perfect road. "Have you ever thought about how inefficient the world is?" the driver asked suddenly, his monotone unwavering. "All the random elements, traffic jams, crooked trees, uneven pavement, it's a flawed design. It could be so much better, smoother, more logical." Jonah said nothing. He was listening to his own corrupted thoughts, spoken aloud by a phantom of the curse. They drove for an hour. In the distance, the lights of a small town appeared. Unlike the distant glow of a normal town, these were a sharp, precise grid of lights. As they got closer, Jonah saw the town was laid out in a perfect grid, the streets intersecting at flawless 90-degree angles. "We're here," the driver said, pulling into a gas station. The pumps were all perfectly aligned. The numbers on the price sign were all clean, whole integers. No messy fractions of a cent. "I need to use the restroom," Jonah said, needing to get out to escape the perfect, sterile environment of the car. He walked into the station's convenience store. The aisles were perfectly straight. The products on the shelves were arranged by color and size, their labels all facing forward with military precision. A woman stood behind the counter, her movements economical as she wiped the already spotless surface. She smiled at him, a perfect, symmetrical smile. He went into the restroom. The tile work on the floor was a flawless checkerboard. The sink was gleaming, the mirror without a single smudge. He looked at his own reflection. His face was grimy, his hair a mess, his clothes torn and dirty. He was the only chaotic element in this new, ordered world. He was the flaw. He washed his hands, the water pressure constant and unchanging. He looked into the mirror again. He had to fight this. He had to embrace what Cassidy had told him. He had to break the rules. He took a deep breath, and with a sudden, violent motion, he smashed his fist into the mirror. The glass did not shatter into a chaotic spiderweb of cracks. It broke into 1,000 perfect, geometrically identical squares of glass, which fell into the sink with a sound like sterile musical chimes. The woman from the counter appeared in the doorway. Her perfect smile was gone, replaced by a look of profound disappointment and disapproval. "That was not an optimal action," she said, her voice a flat, judgmental monotone. "You have introduced an unnecessary variable into the system. It will have to be corrected." Behind her in the main store, he saw the driver from the car. He was no longer empty-handed. He was holding a long, heavy steel rod. It was a surveyor's chain, its links polished to a mirror shine. It was another of the artifacts, and the man was holding it not like a tool, but like a weapon. Chapter 17. A Flaw in the Design. The surveyor's chain hung from the driver's hand, its metallic links gleaming under the sterile, fluorescent lights of the store. It didn't look like a weapon of blunt force. It looked like an instrument of correction. A tool designed to measure, to align, to force things back into their proper, rigid order. Jonah backed away, deeper into the restroom. The shattered, perfectly square pieces of the mirror crunched under his boots. "Stay away from me." "Deviations cannot be tolerated," the driver said, his voice a flat, passionless hum. He took a step forward, the woman from the counter stepping aside with a smooth, efficient movement. "The pattern must be maintained. You are becoming unstable, architect." Architect. The word sent a chill down Jonah's spine. They saw him as their master, yet they were moving to discipline him. He was a god who had violated his own commandments. He looked around the restroom for a weapon, for anything to defend himself. There was nothing, only the smooth, sterile surfaces of his new, ordered hell. The driver advanced, the chain swinging gently at his side. Cassidy's words echoed in his mind. Embrace the flaw. Seek the crooked path. Smashing the mirror had been an act of chaos, and it had provoked a response. He needed more chaos. He needed to be the chaos. The driver was in the doorway now. He raised the chain. Jonah didn't wait. He lunged forward, not at the man, but at the sink. He grabbed the heavy porcelain basin with both hands and heaved, putting all his weight, all his desperation into it. The plumbing, installed with the unnatural perfection of the curse, was not designed for this kind of stress. With a screech of tortured metal, the sink ripped away from the wall, pipes snapping, water spraying everywhere. It was heavy, awkward, but it was a weapon. Jonah swung the sink like a battering ram. The driver, his movements programmed for efficiency, not for surprise, was too slow to react. The heavy porcelain crashed into his side. The man grunted, a flicker of something, not pain but system error crossing his placid face. He staggered back, dropping the surveyor's chain with a loud clatter on the tile floor. Water gushed from the broken pipes, flooding the floor, spreading in a messy, unpredictable puddle. It was a beautiful, chaotic stain on the perfect checkerboard tiles. The woman shrieked, a sound of pure offense at the disorder, and scrambled back from the spreading water. Jonah didn't press his attack. He dove for the chain. His fingers closed around the cool, heavy links. The moment he touched it, a new wave of information flooded his mind. Not a memory being taken, but a rule being imposed. He suddenly understood the precise mathematical relationship between distance, speed, and time. He saw the world as a series of vectors and velocities. It was a nauseating, inhuman perspective. The curse was strengthening, integrating a new parameter. But with the new understanding came a new idea, a new way to break the rules. He scrambled to his feet, the heavy chain in one hand, the silver compass still on his belt. The driver was recovering, moving towards him again. Jonah backed out of the restroom and into the main store. The woman was frantically trying to mop up the spreading water with a stack of perfectly folded napkins, a futile, pathetic effort to restore order. Jonah ran down one of the perfectly organized aisles. The driver followed, his steps measured, efficient. He was a hunter who knew his prey's exact velocity. He would intercept him at the end of the aisle. It was a mathematical certainty. Jonah had to do something uncertain. He stopped, turned, and hurled the chain not at the driver but upwards at the fluorescent light fixtures. The heavy metal links wrapped around one of the long tubes. Sparks rained down. The lights flickered violently. Then, with a heave, Jonah pulled. The light fixture tore from the ceiling with a shower of wires and plaster dust, swinging down like a pendulum. It crashed into the shelves, sending a cascade of perfectly stacked cans and boxes tumbling to the floor. They rolled and bounced in 1,000 different, unpredictable directions. Chaos. The driver stopped, his placid face for the first time showing a hint of confusion. His programming couldn't handle the sudden influx of random variables. Cans of perfectly ordered soup were rolling around his feet, their paths chaotic and illogical. His perfect interception course was ruined. Jonah used the moment of hesitation. He ran for the door. He burst out into the night. The ordered grid of the town was still there, but it felt weaker. The edges were fuzzier. The smashed mirror, the flood of water, the chaos in the store. He was introducing flaws into the code, and the system was struggling to compensate. He looked for the car. It was gone. The curse had withdrawn its perfect transportation. He was on foot. He ran. He picked a street at random and just ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to keep moving, to keep making unpredictable choices. He ran for several blocks, the perfect grid of the town a monotonous, repeating pattern. He needed to get out of the town, back to the desert. He looked for a landmark, but there were none. Every building was a neat, featureless box. Every street was identical. He pulled out the compass. The needle was still pointing at his chest. But now, the surveyor's chain, which he had scooped up and now held in his other hand, was also faintly glowing. The two artifacts were resonating with each other. He held them close together. The needle on the compass trembled, then shifted. For a split second, it pointed not at him but down one of the identical side streets. It was a fleeting, momentary signal. What did it mean? Was it a trap? Or was it a sign of another artifact, another piece of the system? He had to choose. The logical choice was to keep running in a straight line away from the town, but Cassidy's voice was in his head. Seek the crooked path. He turned and ran down the side street the compass had indicated. He was running deeper into the grid, not away from it. It was an irrational choice. It felt right. The street ended in a small, perfectly square park. In the exact center of the park was a playground, a swing set, a slide, a sandbox. Everything was made of gleaming, sterile metal. There were no children. It was a monument to the idea of play with all the chaotic joy surgically removed. And in the center of the sandbox, half buried in the fine gray sand, was an object. It was a brass plumb bob, the heavy, pointed weight used by masons and surveyors to find a perfect vertical line. It was hanging from a tripod, its tip hovering a fraction of an inch from the sand, perfectly still. The third artifact. As he approached, a figure rose from behind the swing set. It was a child, but it wasn't the ghostly, ephemeral Lottie. This was a solid, real boy with neatly combed hair and a clean, pressed shirt. His face was as placid and emotionless as the driver's. "You are not playing correctly," the boy said, his voice a high-pitched monotone. "The lines are not being respected. The game has rules, architect." The boy raised his hand, and the sand in the sandbox began to shift. It did not blow in the wind. It flowed, rising up, forming into solid, sharp-edged shapes. Golems of sand, their forms shifting but always geometrically precise, rose from the ground. "Correction is required," the boy said, his eyes empty and calm. "You must be brought back to level." Chapter 18. The Law of Falling Bodies. The sand golems solidified, their forms shifting between perfect cubes, pyramids, and sharp-angled polyhedra. Their movements were silent, their presence an extension of the park's sterile order. The boy stood among them, an impassive general commanding an army of living mathematics. Jonah stood his ground, the chain in one hand, his gaze fixed on the plumb bob hanging in the center of the sandbox. That was the anchor, the thing that gave this new enemy its power. This artifact didn't govern distance or direction, but the vertical, gravity, level, the fundamental down of the world. "The game is over," Jonah said, his voice low and steady. He was beginning to understand. These were not just random minions. The driver, the clerk, the boy, they were personifications of the curse's core tenets: efficiency, order, and now rules. "The game is never over," the boy stated, his monotone voice a chilling counterpoint to his childish form. "It is only refined. Your introduction of chaotic variables was not anticipated. A system flaw. We are the patch. We will restore equilibrium." The sand golems began to advance, sliding over the ground in a frictionless glide. They didn't lumber. They moved with the eerie precision of chess pieces. Jonah knew he couldn't fight them head-on. They were extensions of the ground he stood on. He needed another flaw, another unpredictable action. He looked up at the swing set. It was a simple machine, a pendulum. Its motion was predictable, governed by the very laws of physics that the curse was now enforcing with absolute rigidity. But what if he used that predictability against itself? He ran towards the swing set, the golems gliding after him. He leaped onto one of the swings, a flexible rubber seat on metal chains. He began to pump his legs, building momentum, back and forth, a perfect, predictable arc. The boy watched, his head tilting in curiosity. Your vector is inefficient for escape. Your oscillation is a known quantity. You are merely delaying the correction. The golems surrounded the swing set, waiting for his arc to decay, for him to slow down and stop. They did not rush. The outcome was a mathematical certainty. At the peak of his forward swing, high above the ground, Jonah did the last thing the system expected. He let go. He launched himself into the air, not forward, not backward, but sideways. He twisted his body, an intentionally clumsy, chaotic motion. He was no longer a pendulum. He was an object in freefall, a chaotic variable. He crashed into the sand at the edge of the sandbox, tumbling and rolling to dissipate the impact. The golems, their programming fixed on the predictable arc of the swing, were momentarily confused. Their perfect geometric forms seemed to stutter, unable to immediately process his irrational trajectory. That moment was all he needed. He scrambled to the tripod and snatched the plumb bob. The instant his skin touched the cool brass, the world lurched. The rigid, perfect gravity of the curse intensified 100-fold. He felt an immense weight pressing down on him, forcing him to his knees. But with the crushing weight came a new, terrible understanding. He now perceived the world as a series of pressures, stresses, and potential points of structural failure. He understood the law of falling bodies not as a theory, but as a fundamental truth he could feel in his bones. And he felt the greatest structural flaw of all: himself. The boy and his sand golems reformed, turning to face him. You embrace the flaws. You accumulate the errors. The system cannot hold both the rules and your continued existence, the boy said. One must be deleted. You're right, Jonah gasped, struggling against the immense pressure. He looked at the 3 artifacts he now held or wore: the compass, which had bound itself to his will, the chain, which had defined his perception of distance, the plumb bob, which was now crushing him under the weight of a perfect, absolute down. They were a system. They were the curse, and he was their nexus. He couldn't destroy them without destroying himself, but Cassidy had told him to embrace the flaw. The greatest flaw in Jedediah's original curse was his pride, his belief that he could control it. The greatest flaw in this new curse of order was Jonah's own chaotic, unpredictable human nature. The curse was trying to erase that nature, to smooth him out, to make him a perfect, willing architect. To win, he had to do the one thing the system could not comprehend. He had to surrender, not to the curse, but to his own imperfection. He dropped the chain. He dropped the plumb bob. They fell into the sand with a heavy thud. He unclipped the silver compass from his belt and placed it gently on the ground in front of him. He was disarming himself, relinquishing the tools of his own damnation. The boy and the golems paused. This was an illogical move. It was capitulation. "I am the flaw," Jonah said, looking not at the boy but at the empty space around him, speaking to the system itself. "And a perfect system can have no flaws. You want order. You want equilibrium. Then let me go. Eject the error. Write me out of the equation." He was offering the curse a choice, a logical paradox. To keep him, the source of the chaos, would be to violate its own prime directive of maintaining order. To destroy him would be the ultimate act of correction. But to let him go, to push him out of its reality entirely, would be the most efficient way to restore its own internal, sterile peace. The boy tilted his head, processing the paradox. The sand golems began to lose their sharp edges, their forms softening as the system struggled with the conflicting commands. "The variable is unstable," the boy murmured, his monotone voice now laced with a flicker of static. "Recalculating, optimal solution, isolation, is preferable to integration of chaos." The world began to dissolve. It did not collapse like Jedediah's maze. It faded. The perfect, rigid lines of the buildings grew soft. The grid of stars blurred back into a random, beautiful scatter. The sterile metal of the playground rusted and decayed in an instant. The crushing pressure of the perfect gravity vanished, replaced by the gentle, uneven pull of the real world. The boy, the golems, the town itself were all turning into a fine gray dust, like sand pouring through an infinite hourglass. The curse was not breaking, it was withdrawing. It was pulling its reality, its perfect, sterile order, back into the artifacts, leaving the real, flawed world behind. It was choosing to isolate itself rather than be contaminated by his humanity. Jonah stood alone in the center of an empty desert, the three artifacts lying in the sand at his feet. The last vestiges of the ordered town faded into the night. He was free. He was standing under a sky of glorious, chaotic stars. He knelt and looked at the compass, the chain, and the plumb bob. They were inert now, their internal world sealed off. But he knew they were still dangerous. They were prisons, waiting for a new jailer. He did not smash them. He did not throw them away. He understood now. To do so would be to unleash their potential again. He had to do what the first people, the ones who knew the land was thin, would have done. He buried them. He dug a deep hole in the sand with his bare hands. He placed the three instruments of reality's corruption inside. He said no words, no ritual. He just covered them with the flawed, imperfect, real earth. He stood up and looked at his hands. They were dirty, scratched, and beautifully, wonderfully real. He had no map. He had no compass he could trust. The concept of north in his mind felt quiet, subdued, no longer a rigid law but a gentle suggestion. He was a map maker with no maps, a surveyor with no tools. He had started this journey to define a piece of the world, and had ended it by accepting that the world's beauty was in its refusal to be perfectly defined. He turned his back on the buried curse and began to walk. He did not know which way was east or west. He simply chose a direction that felt right, his path a crooked, uncertain line across the face of the silent, sleeping desert. And for the first time in his life, he was not afraid of getting lost. Chapter 19. the shape of the horizon. 1 year later, the coffee shop was filled with the gentle, disorderly music of a normal Tuesday morning. The clatter of ceramic on saucer, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of a dozen overlapping conversations. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans, steamed milk, and rain-wet pavement from the street outside. Jonah Hale sat at a small table by the window, watching the chaos. A bus splashed through a puddle, its path slightly altered by the uneven crown of the road. A woman laughed, a sudden, loud burst of sound that made a man at the next table look up. The barista fumbled a cup, catching it just before it hit the floor. Each event was a small, unpredictable variable. Each one was beautiful. Jonah lifted his own cup. His hand was steady, but the faint, silvery scars on his knuckles, relics from his encounter with the shattered mirror, seemed to catch the light. He had been found on the highway 2 days after his escape, dehydrated and incoherent, by a trucker whose rig rattled and groaned with 1,000 lovely imperfections. He had told the authorities a story of heat stroke, of getting lost, of hallucinations. They had accepted it. The world was not equipped to understand the truth. He took a sip of his coffee. The taste was complex, slightly bitter, slightly sweet. Not a perfect flavor, but a real one. For months after his return, he had lived in a state of quiet terror. He would wake up in the middle of the night and check the stars from his apartment window, a silent prayer on his lips, relieved to find them in their familiar, random sprawl. He would walk through the city and find himself staring at the subtle, beautiful flaws in the world around him. A crack in the sidewalk, a crooked telephone pole, a weed pushing its way through the concrete. These were no longer signs of decay, but affirmations of life, proof that the curse remained buried, its sterile perfection sealed away. He had quit his job. He could no longer bring himself to impose straight lines and perfect angles onto a world he now knew deserved better. The tools of his trade, theodolites, laser measures, GPS units, felt like sacrilege in his hands. He sold his equipment. He kept only a single, cheap plastic compass, the kind given to schoolchildren. Its needle wavered, trembled, and was easily swayed by a nearby piece of metal. It was wonderfully, reassuringly unreliable. His gaze drifted back to the window. He was watching the horizon. It was the thing he had come here to this small coastal town to see. The line where the gray, churning ocean met the gray, overcast sky. It was not a line. It was a smudge. A soft, indistinct boundary, constantly shifting with the swell of the waves and the drift of the clouds. It was a perfect imperfection. He had spent his life believing that a map was a tool for control, for making the unknown known. He understood now that a true map was not a grid of answers, but a testament to the questions. It should celebrate the blank spaces. It should respect the mystery. A young woman sat down at the table next to him. She was a student, he guessed, from the university nearby. She pulled a textbook and a notebook from her bag. The book's title was Advanced Cartographical Theory. She opened her notebook. It was filled with crisp, precise drawings, parabolas, topographical lines, geodesic equations. She worked with a focused, intense concentration that Jonah knew intimately. He saw his younger self in her, the man who believed the world could be perfectly rendered, perfectly understood. He felt a pang, not of regret but of a strange, protective pity. He wanted to lean over and tell her. He wanted to say, "The math is beautiful, but do not forget the smudge on the horizon. Do not forget the crooked path. The world is not a problem to be solved." But he said nothing. It was not his lesson to teach. It was a truth that could not be taught, only learned. And the price of that lesson was a journey into a place like Marrow's Reach. He finished his coffee, the last drops a cool, imperfect swirl at the bottom of the cup. He left a few dollars on the table, more than enough to cover the bill. He stood up and walked out of the shop, pulling up the collar of his jacket against the light, misty rain. He did not turn left or right. He did not head for a specific destination. He simply walked, his pace unhurried, his path guided by the simple, random whim of the moment. He was a man without a map in a world that was gloriously, beautifully unwritten. And for the first time in his entire life, he felt like he knew exactly where he was going. The end.